Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Licence Committee. I'm delighted to be back in the council chamber and very welcome to members of the public, including the ones behind me, who joined us, and particularly those who are speaking on the two planning applications we've got this evening. And again, welcome to anybody who is following remotely from Zoom. There are a few housekeeping rules to share. Social distancing restrictions have been lifted. We aren't asking people to wear a mask once seated, but you have got masks and protective screens if you wish to use them. And if I could ask everybody to speak very loudly and clearly, so that the audio feed picks that up. And again, if you're here for one particular agenda item, we're taking Techn 1 first, or Techn 2, technically speaking, and you can certainly leave the meeting when that's concluded. I will give a short adjournment as usual to enable anybody who wishes to leave at that point. Again, I'm sure the two gentlemen concerned have read the protocols on the recording of council meeting, and so I won't repeat those. I'll take them as read. Thank you very much indeed. And so, do I have any apologies, please?
We have apologies from Councillor Andrew Brown, Councillor Ball and Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you very much indeed. Declarations of interest, please, members. Councillor Oxford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, 2020 1262 and 1263 MAF, the Ketton applications. I am good friends with the neighbouring property to the application. However, it's not a pecuniary interest, so I feel that it will not prejudice my interest, so I will take part in the debate and vote. But I say I've come here with an open mind, and I will listen to the officers' reports and members' comments before I make my decision.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Payne.
On the same basis, we also know all the speakers.
Different sort of Zoom, I think.
Sorry, we also know all the speakers for the two applications. As a member of the parish council, that's all. It's not being.
Thank you very much indeed. And similarly, Councillor Brown, thank you. And again, I should have done this before, but to introduce members, Kylie Weston, who is keeping me right on all the legal aspects this evening. Thank you. And before I move to item 3, petitions and deputation, this evening I'm going to go with established practice for this planning committee. I have checked this with governance, and so when it comes to the speakers who are down on your order paper, I will allow them 3 minutes as usual to speak, but then I will give members more time to ask questions in the interest of a well-informed democratic debate. Again, I would ask you members please to be concise and not repetitive, and should you stray away from those two principles, you will get a rebuke from the chair, but I'm sure, and again, technically it is 30 minutes for that, but again, I will be reasonably flexible in the interests of a full debate on that one, and that will apply to all applications this evening. And the final point before I move precisely to 3, the ward member for the Oakham application, Councillor Dale, will, as again, we've always had established practice on this, he will be free to join in the debate in exactly the same way as members of the committee, but will not be able to vote. Sorry, so obviously, yes.
Well, just a question, Mr. Chairman. We haven't got actually the previous meetings minutes. And we haven't actually, normally we would agree them before we start the meeting.
You're absolutely right. I think I'm just being advised it's because it is an additional meeting. So we'll no doubt pick that up on the next regular one.
Thank you.
But thank you for pointing that out. Yes, thank you. So if we now move to item 3, and so again, that will come the usual procedure. We will have the officer's presentation, then I will invite the speakers according to the order in which they were received, and again 3 minutes to make your presentation. Time for questions, moving on to the second speaker, same thing repeated, and when that has all gone through, that will be the point at which I will open the debate for members. So I hope that's clear, and I hope it's reasonably clear to members of the public. So having said that,
thank you, Chairman. The first application, well, the first and the second application are sites in Ketton, they are linked in so much as the second application's affordable housing contribution is proposed to be put on this site. Sorry, we'll start. So the first application is for the erection of 50 dwellings and its associated works, parking and landscaping. And this is at Preston High Street. First slide just shows the site outlined in red. It's approximately 1.3 hectares in size. It's accessed off of High Street and it's towards the northern end of the village. To the south of the site, there are a number of stone-listed buildings, cottages, and I think there's also a telephone kiosk as well towards the southwestern edge of the site. There used to be a number of, I think, 7 detached bungalows on the site, fronting onto the High Street, and then also a laboratory building associated with the Ketton Cement Works that are again located to the north of the site. These have now been demolished. This is an aerial shot showing the site in relation to Ketton Cement, the wider village, and then the site, the other part of subject of the next application, but also relevant here, is this site that I'm just circling now. It's about 250 metres to the southwest. This is an aerial shot of the site, and you can see the buildings that have been demolished. So the bungalows have all gone now, as is the laboratory building that's shown on the site there. So the proposals for 50 dwellings. There has been the site is allocated for residential development in the adopted site allocations document. There was a scheme approved in 2019, that's the reference number, and that was for 35 dwellings on the site. You can see that there were a number of properties fronting the High Street and then an access road in development to the rear, with again some, these were the affordable housing properties that were going in this location, with some garages to the front of the site. So what is proposed now So what's proposed now is a mix of 2 and 2.5 story properties and a mix of 2, 3 and 4 bed dwellings as well. This next plan shows the materials. What is proposed predominantly on site is stone and buff brick. The light blue shading we spent quite a lot of time with the applicants and our urban designer in order to try and get the key elevations in a stone. So those all fronted onto the high street, and those on the main drive in to the site, and then this end block of buildings here, which is an end stop as you look down the drive, are all to be stone fronted and side with, again, a buff and slate, buff brick and slate for the materials. So. This plan shows the affordable housing mix that's proposed. So we tried to get them spread out across the site in terms of there are a number at 2 at this end, there are 3 up here on the northern side, and then there's a cluster at this far end as well. We tried to get them potted around the site as much as we can. They are mixed around there. We've had a number of discussions with the applicant about that. The proposal is, as I've said already, there's 21 affordable units on site. 15 are as a direct result of this application, and then 6 are from the Chater field site that we will be discussing next. Just quickly show some of the house types that we've got proposed, which are not dissimilar to other properties that have been grouped elsewhere and similar to what was previously on the site. Some of these are detached, and then these are shaded with the terrace properties. So in terms of the site itself, so this is looking from the high street towards, you can see the listed buildings in the background with the stone wall. You've got the listed telephone kiosk. So this is looking towards the west. And then another looking in the opposite direction there. Panning around now from the west, you can see these are the properties on the back onto or front onto Kit Lane. You can see the industrial buildings in the background on that shot. Again, just panning around a bit more. Just now looking across the site towards the northern boundary Castle Cement site in the background. You can see it's scrubland at the moment. It's like I say, the buildings have been cleared and it's been left to scrub. This is now looking at the access to Avenue, the properties on Kiko Avenue, and the TPM trees that are along that boundary. Again, looking across there. And now this is one looking back from this is at the eastern end of the site, looking across to the west. So, lots of policies, there's lots of writing on this slide, so I'll go through them. I don't expect anyone to need to read any of these. These are the policies that are relevant, set out in the core strategy. In terms of the policy context, it is within the planned limits of Ketton. It is a local service centre, and the site is allocated for housing. I make reference there to policy CS10, which talks about the density of sites, and in villages it indicates an indicative threshold of 30 dwellings per hectare. Now this site is currently 38 dwellings per hectare, but the policy in terms of CS10 is somewhat out of date in terms of it was adopted in 2011, and the new National Planning Policy Framework that we use at the moment talks about the need to make the best and good use of land, including brownfield sites. So the number is not really the issue that it is having. What members do need to consider, in particular, is whether they consider the density and the layout appropriate for this part of town, and in terms of the character, the visual amenity, and also residential amenity as well. And I'll pick that up in a bit. As I said, we spent quite a lot of time with the developers, and we believe that there is sufficient space and amenity space between the dwellings, and that it doesn't have a detrimental impact. Another key point, as members are aware, is that the council don't currently have a 5-year housing land supply. Our housing land supply is currently at approximately 3.5 years now. And this development of 50 dwellings would make a significant contribution to that shortfall. The NPPF does have a presumption in favour of sustainable development where the planning policies are considered to be out of date because we don't have a 5-year housing land supply. And policy SP1 also, there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development. As officers, we consider that the benefits of providing the housing on this site significantly outweigh any harms that the development causes. In terms of design, there's a wide range of or a mix of house types on here. The palette of materials we consider to be appropriate has now been amended to be limestone buff brick, and we've also sort of increased the detail on the dwellings so that they are relevant and protect and enhance the character of this part of Ketton conservation area. We have, as you will have seen from the plans, and I'll go back to them just so I can show this. You can see there were the original bungalows that fronted onto the high street and gave it the crescent its name because of that shape. The proposed scheme now, again, proposes to reflect that in a similar nature at the front of the site. So that's, we tried to reflect that and keep that. We've also sought to get additional detailing such as chimneys into the proposed dwellings to make sure that they're more appropriate in keeping with the area. Have low stone walls fronting the boundary of the properties, especially in the more public areas, so that is appropriate to have a low stone wall rather than what we consider to be inappropriate fencing, which would be quite out of character. There's also 2 distinct public areas of open space, which I'll just point those out on the plan, which are, there's an area of public open space at the centre of the site, and then also an area at the front of the site as well as you come in. So again, the dwellings are being sited so as not to impact on the protected trees, especially those on Kemper Avenue, and the consultant design officer, the designer, and also the council's conservation officer are happy that the proposals would not have a detrimental impact. And they have, in terms of heritage, we have considered that it has a less than substantial harm on the character of the conservation area and adjacent listed buildings. And where there is less than substantial harm, then that has to be weighed against the wider public benefits. And in this case, the provision of 21 affordable houses and 50 dwellings is considered to be a significant public benefit that outweighs any limited harm. As I've already talked about the residential amenity, separation distances are considered to be acceptable. and conditions in order to ensure that when the dwellings are constructed, that the final site levels are acceptable are proposed. There's a stonemason to the rear of the site, and that has conditions from its own consent in 2014 that requires noise levels not to exceed a set limit. We've also had an assessment done on this development, and subject to a boundary treatment fence and some acoustic glazing being put into the dwellings, the noise issues are satisfactorily controlled, and the environmental health officer is now happy with those proposals. Highways, there's been a lot of discussion about the highways and design. Our highways officer is now happy with the proposed design, albeit it is to be, it's not to be adopted, it would be a private driveway. It's subject to conditions if considered that the development will be acceptable and there'll be no detrimental impact as a result of public safety. Drainage, there's been no objection from Anglian Water or the League Local Flood Authority, subject to conditions, and they are set out in the addendum. On the second page of your addendum, there's just an additional condition that says that no drainage work shall commence until the surface water management municipality has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. And that no higher expenditure will be constructed until the works will be carried out in accordance with the surface water strategy as it's agreed. Archaeology, again, no objections from the archaeologist, subject to trial trenching works being undertaken. But overall, the ecology, there is a net biodiversity loss because of redeveloping the site. The policies in the NPPF talk about requiring a 10% biodiversity net gain, and this will be secured via a Section 106 agreement, which the applicant has indicated that they are willing to enter into. So there will be a financial contribution as per the policy requirements of the NPPF to offset that, and that figure is set out in the report. On page 29, the figure would be between approximately 37,000 and 62,000. That's ultimately to be calculated using the DEFRA assessment tool. I've talked about the affordable housing. Only to point out at this point that the 6 dwellings that are coming from the Chaterfield site, the Chaterfield site is 225 metres to the east of this site, or southeast of this site, so it's relatively close, and so it's not the same as having an affordable contribution that is put in a different village, for example, which wouldn't be particularly desirable. So overall, Chairman, the application is recommended for approval. It is an allocated site. And I think the thing that members need to weigh up is that there is obviously a shortfall of affordable housing. The key issue here being that the main policy conflict is that the development doesn't provide the housing mix that we would usually ask for across the site. Taken with the Chaterfield one, there is a reasonable mix of housing types. It is in line with the actual policy, but notwithstanding this, given the layout, the appropriate design and amendments that have been taken on board by the applicant, and the much needed housing and affordable housing, it is recommended that on balance the application can be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Johnson. So if I can ask Mrs. Taylor to come forward on behalf of the Kent Parish Council. Thank you. you have your 3 minutes when you're ready, and then if you stay where you are for any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm speaking on behalf of Ketton Parish Council, which has accepted this is an allocated site suitable for development, but we say that the proposals as they stand are still not acceptable. Original allocation for this site was 35 dwellings, which is 30 per hectare, being appropriate for the site and character of this area of Ketton. Current proposal, as you heard, is for 50 homes, which is 38 per hectare, which has resulted in a design with poor built form and layout and with an over-reliance on parking courts, all of which would detract from the context of the Firs area of the Ketton Conservation Area, which it borders on 2 sides. The developers are bringing this site forward in tandem with Chesterfield, as you heard. Therefore, all of the required affordable houses are located on this site, which will comprise 42% of the total houses on the site. None of these affordable houses have more than 4 bedrooms or 4+ bedrooms, despite the SHMA need for 5 to 10% of affordable homes with 4+ bedrooms. It is still very obvious which are the affordable homes, and they are still concentrated in the northwest sector of the site, nearest the industrial development, the stone yard, as you said, and that stone yard will not only generate noise, but also dust. The original 2017 plans had the affordable houses spread out, with some towards the southeastern plot, close to where the proposed public open space and play areas are. Given that the affordable houses have small or no gardens, being close to the play areas would be desirable. Parking arrangements are improved to what they were, but 2 parking spaces per residence is still insufficient. Our neighbourhood plan survey found that 41% of households have 2 cars and 19% have 3 or more cars. 2 visitor parking spaces would be likely to be used by residents, and so additional parking will be on the lane, which will not leave it free for general village use. In order to achieve biodiversity net gain in mitigation for habitat loss, this site and Chesterfield site, the developer has proposed a new orchard within Ketton. It's essential that if this comes to fruition, this orchard becomes a community asset in perpetuity, and that its establishment and management is fully funded by the developer over the next 30 years at least. In view of findings of that survey, etc., we suggest that bat-friendly lighting should be a condition of any planning consent, together with some sort of condition that it cannot be removed at a later date by residents. Also, we're very concerned about inadequate plans for dealing with surface water, because it could result in an unacceptable risk of flooding for properties on the south side of the house high street, which actually slope down towards the river and onto the A612 to the southeast. If all 3 sites under the same ownership, so there is a 3rd site, are built out as proposed, it will result in 86 more homes along a 600-metre stretch of the high street and a possible increase in population of 10% plus. Ketton is limited in terms of sustainability and infrastructure, relying heavily on Stamford, to which there is a bus service that is actually not fit for purpose. It should be a condition of any planning consent that all construction traffic approaches Ketton from the east in order to avoid the main part of the village, which includes the school, library, crossroads and very narrow pavements. And that's especially if 2 or 3 sites are built out together or consecutively. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Kay. Members? Councillor Oxley.
Yes, thank you. What is the opinion of the parish council with regards to the loss of the footpath that goes through the site? Because does it not?
No, it's the other side.
It's the other side.
You can ask me.
Okay.
Any other members? Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the opinion of members of your parish council about the design and as the roofing materials and the stone materials?
It's certainly improved to the original plans, which were for red brick, buff brick, and very little in the way of limestone walling. So it has certainly improved. Obviously, ideally, we'd like to see all stone houses, which is what has happened in two more recent developments, Piebald Close and Holmes Drive, and they're all stone. But this is better, a lot better than it was.
Thank you. I take it it's better, but not acceptable.
Could
It's
you
better.
use your microphone? Oh,
It's not a main issue of the parish council.
Thank you.
Councillor Becky.
Thank you. I was concerned about the addendum today about the surface waters from angry water, as you pointed out. Just so I have a bit of local knowledge, is there any history of localised flooding along that road and
Yes.
in that area currently?
Yes, if after very heavy rain, if you travel east out of village towards Stamford, there is a dip which often fills up with water because it gets water from Petco Avenue, Pit Lane, and if this is developed out, it will also get water from this development as well. So we already get issues with flooding. And the properties on the south side of High Street have dropped curbs, so they could, possibly get flooding issues too.
Any other questions? Councillor Gordon Brown.
Chair, just picking up on that point, is there any history of houses being flooded, particularly basements being flooded along the high street?
There is, but further up, but it's still the same problem. To the north of the high street, it slopes steeply, and the geology is such that the water doesn't necessarily drain very fast into the ground. And on the south side, they slope down towards the River Chater. So we've had problems further up the street, yes. But I don't know about this particular section.
Any other questions from members? In that case, Mr. Kelly, thank you very much indeed. And I'll ask Mr. Mike Walker to come forward for the applicant. Thank you. So, 3 minutes for your presentation. Press the button and then questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members. Thank you for the opportunity to present to committee. Firstly, I would like to make the committee aware that I do have vested interest in the scheme, not just on behalf of being a representative of the developer, but I'm a Rutland Council taxpayer, a resident, and therefore especially keen to see both the sites ensure a positive legacy is left, because I drive through the village very often indeed. I would start my presentation by saying, as the officer mentioned, the County Council are not able to demonstrate the 5-year housing land supply. Therefore, the presumption in favour of sustainable development within the NPPF applies. In short, the present proposal will make a considerable and positive contribution to the housing shortfall in the district, but this is not why we're interested in the site. It is a very attractive site. The 5-year land supply element is an aside to the ability to design a suitable and appropriate scheme, which I'll pick up on very shortly. The Crescent is an allocated site in the adopted local plan. Officers consider the scheme not to be overdevelopment, and we would commend that to the committee. Highway officers support the development and its layout. The Section 278 approval from highways will secure all frontage restoration works to the lay-by and the existing crossings that are there. They will go, leaving only the main access and 2 others. The lead local flood authority has no objections to the drainage proposal, picking on the discussion that has just been had with the parish. Foul connects into the existing foul main and has capacity. Surface water is dealt with by way of soakaways and storage on site, and that has been approved by the lead local flood authority. And I would pick up and probably dispute the point about flooding here. Flooding is further down towards the Stanford end of the village in our experience. Density, yes, it's 38 dwellings per hectare. The current 35 unit approved scheme is 30. Government policy, as Justin's picked up on, would focus upon circa 35 to 40 dwellings on a brownfield site in this sort of location in a sustainable village. We have worked tirelessly and extensively over the last 15 months with the officers and design officers and the highway officers to ensure we have a legible and appropriate character of development with appropriate materials, landscaping, protection for trees and hedges, appropriate positioning of all units to ensure no detriment is caused to the conservation area, and the schemes of an appropriate design and layout to negate any perception of a dense development. Density alone does not make a scheme poor. That's down to the legibility, mix, housing design, materials, and the landscaping to the scheme to abate that. Housing association properties, the mix has been approved and agreed with the housing officer. We don't make it up, we liaise with the officer and it's an acceptance of the mix proposed on here, and the linking of the two sites. All the FOGs, the coach houses, have private gardens, as do the 2 and 3 bedroom units on there. There is play equipment to be provided on the site, and there are green spaces in the central area around one of the trees with a trim trail as an alternative to actually having to use the main facilities, which are excellent in the rest of the village, and that's credit to the parish council. The affordable are spread and pepper potted through the scheme in appropriate areas. Materials we picked up on, I would point out the Ketco and Pit Lane are pebble dash rendered properties rather than being stone in themselves. To the south, yes, listed buildings, they are stone. The stone wall, we are picking up on the stone wall detailing, albeit as a hedge that will be reinstated along the frontage, and we have then looked at major frontages through the scheme, and indeed some of the affordable are actually detailed with chimneys and detailed out of stone to integrate them and provide a very quickly.
Thank you.
The biodiversity net gain, the main element is to be provided. We are trying to provide increased biodiversity on the site, but there is also a payment to come from this site. The orchard is solely the preserve of the Chase Field scheme. I'll just correct that point. The headmaster has supported the scheme. The school's in desperate need of more children, and the two schemes combined will enable that. Still will be about £540,000 arising from this scheme alone, and in that regard, I commend the officer's recommendation to committee. Many thanks.
Thank you. Members? Councillor Oxley, then Councillor Robert Brown.
I'll go to the board members first. Thank you. Yes, question with regards to, you mentioned working up with the chimneys. I think we've been working with chimneys.
There won't be, and in part there won't be because we're not allowed to put work in chimneys. We're not allowed gas boilers, and we are working to.
I'm talking about wood burning.
No, there won't be. There will, on this scheme there won't be, and in part it is part of the carbon footprint, the carbon reduction, and not on we get away with the wrong expression. We can use gas boilers on this site. In the future we won't be able to, but to keep the carbon footprint of the thing down, we will not. They won't be real chimneys, but they will be clad with the appropriate material. They won't be plastic, and they won't have an imaginary look. They will have brick slips on them where appropriate, or
so but they won't be working.
They won't work.
Just a decorative purpose.
They are a decorative feature.
So if people want to burn wood or
they will have to put
smokeless fuel in the, they won't be able to. So they'll be totally reliant on gas or electric to heat their houses.
They will be.
And will the houses be insulated?
Absolutely, they will be. The building rate has moved on. Part L is arriving, as we all be aware, of the insulation levels are increased, and the fabric first approach is what we would always advocate. So if we over insulate the properties, you reduce the reliance upon fossil fuels, and that's the approach that we would take on any scheme, and this scheme is no exception to it.
Okay, and one more question. Do you think that, given the fact that you're putting concrete down on a field, it will make any difference to water running off onto the road?
Yes, in that you've got 50% generally is the rule of thumb, you will have 50% impermeable area across the scheme like that. You've still got obviously the hedges, the trees and garden, the green areas, the open space. But you generally say there's a 50% increase in that. The site itself is actually mainly ground. So and it does have concrete areas in there. Obviously there were properties on there before. So the whole site it's not a field that is, nor is the whole thing impermeable. So we will be increasing runoff, but the whole scheme that has been put forward and agreed by the legal local flood authority has gone through it in detail as to the ground investigations prove that the area where the site will soak is of sufficient size and will enable the drainage to occur at an appropriate rate. There are crates for storing the excess storm water for those 1 in 200, 1 in 1,000 year storm events that we witness more and more frequently, 1 in 3 year events. But there's overcapacity, if you like, to ensure that it's stored to enable it to soak over a long couple of day period of time in those storm events.
I mean, I asked that question because earlier you did say that the flooding events actually happen further up the road. But they may very well occur a little bit closer if you're putting more concrete down on an area that is currently acting as a bit of a soak. That's why I make that point.
I take the point. The bit that I'm aware of is, I forget what the lane is, it's past the council houses, further east towards Stanford, and then on there's the road that goes up, which is the one I would take here to Tickencote and Casterton, and at the bottom there's a lot of on storm events, it's a massive puddle. That's the big storm, that's the big pool of water that I'm familiar with living locally.
Councillor Gordon-Brown.
Chair. I'm just commenting on your comment about the flooding at Steadford Lane. Thank you. That was because of a block of there.
I've lived there 24 years.
However, it's not too flooded anymore. Sorted now. I'm concerned about the flooding risk. In particular, you've gone for infiltration tanks on site, particularly an extremely large one just at the entrance to the site, if I'm not mistaken, the big blue lumps.
I think you might be the one at the entrance of the site is Chater.
Right.
Rather than here, there's a central one and there's one they're more central because the soakaway area is in the centre of this site. Right. So it may well be Chater that you're thinking of. Okay. It needs to be on the right hand side. But they're not infiltration tanks, they're storage tanks. There's a permeability in the ground itself. They hold and store the flood water and keep it back from overwhelming a soakaway, and it trickles through. And as I say, the lead flood authority have examined it, cross-examined it, triple-examined it, and I'm happy with what we are proposing because stormwater is the be-all and end-all of new developments. It has to be addressed, and it's almost a starting point.
I recognise that. My question wasn't in relation to that. My question was in relation to the point that Mr. Kate made, and that is that this site is higher than the properties across the road, as is the Chesterfield as well. And my deep concern is this is a very permeable area, and we have seen springs popping up right along that hillside on a number of occasions, and even on the south side of the high street. How has your flood expert done any work to identify how that water will in fact infiltrate and where it may end up? Because at the end of the day, it's going to end up presumably on the other side of the road, going down to the Chater. And our concern, particularly, I know the parish council's concern, is that it may flood the houses opposite or certainly their gardens. What assurances can you give the residents on that basis?
The assurances I can give are based on the engineering work that has been done. It's been a full intrusive ground investigation. They have gone back on a number of occasions, not just singularly. They've gone back 2 or 3 times to check and recheck the soakage that occurs on the site in the area that we need to utilise. And as per the approving authority, I keep mentioning the lead local flood authority, and we cannot get approval effectively to commence the scheme until we have their agreement that our ground reports, the soakage tests that we've done, and the design of the scheme tick all the right boxes and ensure that there is the security that it ought not to be, and I was 99% sure that it will not be this scheme that provides any flood.
So from your comments, what you're saying is you've done work on site. You've not done work on the other side of the road to identify the ground conditions on the other properties.
We don't have any right. We don't have rights to
So
go
that's
to
the-
people's property. We
Yes,
don't, but they will look at the geological formation.
Can I move on? We've
We've
got
got limited amount of time, we'll check.
ask you to push along. There are a couple of aspects that are missing from the information that I've seen, and I must admit there's a lot of information there. Electric charging, I presume you're providing electric charging on all properties?
We won't necessarily be providing it on all properties. It's not something that's come up in conversation and discussion nor been pointed to us as a policy of the council. We will have, what we tend to do is have at least 3-pin plug sockets for hybrids. I have one myself and they work absolutely fine off that by way of being able to charge. It's not something that it's emerging more and more through council policies, and it's the sort of thing that we are picking up on other schemes. It's not something that we have sought to provide nor been steered in that direction here, for no other reason than we've been concentrating on many other elements. It's not to say that if members wanted to apply a condition that would be anathema to us and a particular objection point.
We'll design the incoming supply to meet the long-term electric charging requirements.
You'd be surprised it's effectively done for us. The electricity companies are pretty much gearing up and have geared up for pretty much all new properties. But we haven't, sorry?
Not from my experience, but
Well, strange enough, genuinely it is coming. We haven't put it on here, but we're not averse to conditions. We've had conditions on numerous other schemes.
Can we take a note of that, Chair, towards the end of the discussion? Fibre to the properties, I presume you're applying fibre.
That would be a natural.
Okay, thank you. On the affordable homes, I presume the social rent, the arrangement you have with the RP risk provider will be that the rental will be at local housing allowance rates or lower.
It will be controlled by your housing officer rather than us.
So if we put a comment in the conditions, that you'd be happy with that?
We work with the housing officer. What if that's the council policy? That's what we would expect to see provided. Forgive my slight ignorance on that, but your officers told us the rent levels and stuff, and the HAs are cognizant.
Finally, I struggled on the drawings that we've seen on the website, but is there a pedestrian access from the west end? I'm talking generically west, the southwest. The pedestrian access from the southwest end onto the high street, so that people don't have to walk the full length of the site to get off, to walk to the shop or the school. No. Is that something you would consider?
We've looked at it. We've looked at it because it has been comments that we've picked up from Mary and the parish. To put one in there, you end up dragging people, taking people through a 3-4 car parking space in between properties, which in our view is it's the wrong direction to take people through. You're opening up the security issues. For one, you have a loop and a rat run that you are specifically creating. And again, from a perspective of the design work that we've been doing in your offices, the best design, it wasn't considered so big a scheme that the additional 60-80 metres walk through the scheme to then walk back towards the town, to the heart of the village, was such that the compromise of a rat run through between properties not overlooked in the scheme, that it was appropriate to put that in. So it was considered, but it was dismissed pretty early on in the negotiation.
I'm surprised, Chairman, because obviously want to encourage people to walk and cycle, and that would be an ideal way to do it, rather than having to force them to go to the east before they go west.
The design of the scheme is to be a lane rather than a street for that main bit through the northern side. So it's much low key there. It's almost like a home zone. It's not something that the cars zooming up and down. So it's pedestrian friendly.
Councillor Payne and then Councillor Becky.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm not going to attempt to put my microphone on because I was getting no feedback again, so I hope you can hear me. Just two questions, please. We know.
Sorry, could we have the microphone on, please? Thank you.
Two questions, please. We know from previous experience or existing experience that noise from the stonemason's yard and the gym on Pit Lane causes nuisance to some of the residents down Pit Lane. Who owns and who maintains the boundary of the acoustic fence you're putting in?
Any fencing that goes on there will be asking our residents or the housing association. The bund that's there is the stonemasons. We've got we reviewed it. Obviously, your environmental health officer picked up on the very point, and we've had our consultants review the scheme in its latest iteration against the condition and the noise level 46 dBA, I think from memory it is, on the stonemason yard. And they've worked that through and extrapolated that, and with, as just been picked up on, with the acoustic glazing to the rear, the issue is controlled satisfactorily, plus the noise level to be enforced on the stonemason yard, and there is the earth bund, considerable earth bund there that still requires planting. I would hasten to add. So once that's planted by the stonemasons, all that combined will keep it as quiet as it needs to be for residential occupation.
And the management company will continue maintenance of that.
No, well, most of it would go into back gardens of the properties along there, and the housing association properties in the the sort of the northwestern corner would maintain that boundary, and then the private properties that run sort of centrally into the northeastern side, they would maintain that as part of their back garden. It would be conveyed to.
Okay, another question then. We've got huge problems in the narrower parts of the village with traffic and school, parking schemes in there. How will you work with the parish council to ensure that no nuisance is caused by construction traffic in that part of the village?
We would expect, and I've seen in the report, this construction management plan, and that we would, through that, we would be setting out the routes and the methodology of the operation on site. And we have similar schemes elsewhere where it is there's one direction in, can't travel through the village, and it's enforced on all our correspondence that goes out with subcontractors, ground workers, and so on and so forth. We're quite clear on hours of operation, we are quite clear on direction of travel. It's made clear when they are appointed at every step of the way through the contract that we have with them. I can't 100% say that nothing will ever go wrong, but we rely upon the parish to converse with us, and we have a relationship and a dialogue anyway with the parish, so that I hope that will continue once we're on site very much so. We'll work together to ensure, but we would monitor and manage in the first instance.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Regan.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions and just a point of clarity. You said a number of occasions that the flood authority were very happy with the current position. But I'm just reading from an addendum today which says agriculture respect the surface water structure buffer steps is not acceptable, and they're not happy with the surface water proposal to have requested authority petition is appended. So currently my understanding is that the legal authority is not happening until mitigation has been put in place.
Anglian Water are not the lead flood authority. Anglian Water look after the potable and the foul.
So they're saying the surface water strategy and flood risk assessment is not acceptable.
I've not seen that, but they are not the lead flood authority. I haven't seen that as Anglian Water. They are not the lead flood authority.
I'm just quoting the information in front of me today, so just can you give some clarity on that?
Sorry, Councillor Regan, I'm just going to ask Mr. Johnson to come in on that one.
Okay. And the lead local flood authority are effectively us, Scotland County Council, and so Julie and her team comment and provide advice on that. Anglian Water obviously deal with the foul water side of things. So they have commented on the surface water drainage strategy as well. Hence, there is a condition on there that requires the details of the forgive me, I've got the word here, the management strategy needs to be submitted and approved prior to any works taking place. So that's why the condition was
So just to be clear, Justin, what you're saying is that the lead flood authority, which is yourself,
is us.
which is you, which is us, is not happy until that management report has been done and submitted and approved by the
Not the lead flood authority, no. Anglian Water are saying they're not happy. The lead flood authority is us, and the consultations from internal is that they are happy, again, subject to conditions and requested a similar, or I think it's the same condition that Anglian Water.
Okay, so you are happy regardless of what Anglian Water is saying?
Well, Anglian Water are saying that subject to that condition, they have no objection. So we put that condition.
But that plan is not yet in place, so
no, but what the condition does is means that no development can take place until that information has been provided.
Sorry to labour, it's just an important point.
Yeah.
Flooding, and we can vote clear on that. Just a couple of, sorry, Mr. Brigger, I think moving on this point,
just to back me up, the way they are phrased, they are holding objections, so you end up with a correspondence from them that also we object unless this condition is put on there. So they're not necessarily, it sounds counterintuitive, but they're not necessarily objecting to the scheme. They want to ensure that that condition is placed on there, rather than having an overarching objection to the scheme. But as I said, we have worked with your flood authority officers to have an approved scheme. Anglian Water is in this instance, because there are no surface water mains here, they are the possible and they are the foul authority.
But no, I understand that, but if I see concerns over flooding, I think as Councillor Brown's also pointed out, it does start to wave red flags, and so that's something that needs to be cleared up. Just a couple of questions for you based on the points that Mrs. Kane brought up. I just want to get your sort of feedback for when we go into debate. Suggestions such as ideas such as back-friendly lighting, for example, would that be something you'd be willing to look at?
We would, and indeed, to feel that there's a proposed condition on there. It's things like the PIR based, the halogen spots, they're unfriendly, so it's things like that.
So you'd be happy if that was the condition. And then just to clarify, from construction traffic, I come from a ward where HGVs is a big issue. You would again be happy with the conditions as far as the traffic management plan that all heavy vehicles came in and out from the east, as opposed to turning.
I would suggest that's exactly why that construction management plan condition is on there, to ensure the protection of.
So effectively, where possible, creating GPS black spots in the HGVs so that we get warnings.
If you tell me how that happens, I'm sure it can be managed. But yeah, we would.
Thank you.
We would direct them not to come through the village.
We have issues in Greater London. I can imagine what Kettle could be like if we have the same level of traffic.
No,
Thank you.
Councillor Clark, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rainwater harvesting. We're talking about flooding. Obviously, there's rainwater harvesting by houses. That would sort of help to alleviate some of the problems. Any of that within your bill?
Not proposed today, but it's not the end of the world to provide the books. It's not grey water recycling as such for toilets. This is not designed to scheme, no, but rainwater butts and the like to assist.
Thank you. From the plan, have we got trees within the site? I know we've got trees on the around the boundary in certain places.
They're pretty much around the site, but around the central open space, the idea is to tree and green that, and along the, if you like, the north, yes, along there, there's to try and create an avenue. So the idea is it's a lane, it's pedestrian friendly, rather than car ways, there are trees either side running along.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we've mentioned the number of parking spaces per house. And I believe you've allowed 2 cars. Now, is that really going to be adequate for the size of the residences you have there?
It ticks the policy box.
Sorry?
It meets your policy.
No. Look, the policies are nonsense and so on, especially when it comes to car parking. The question was, do you consider the number of parking places you have given to each premises is, or will be sufficient?
I do. For example, the pink one on the front, you have a garage and 2 parking spaces per property. So if the garage is used properly, and we can never legislate for that, but if they're used properly and they shouldn't be converted to, we've got the protection against development rights. So you have 3 parking spaces for the larger properties. The green ones in the far corner, they have double garages plus 2 parking spaces, so they have 4 for a 3-bedroom house. And then for majority of the smaller ones, including the coach houses, you have 2 parking spaces for those smaller properties. So you have a 2-bedroom house.
Thank you very much. I think you answered my question.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. Councillor Baldwin.
Yeah, thank you. And I understand from what you're saying that these are going to be gas central heated. That's correct, is it?
That is
the government are phasing these out in 15 years' time, as you're aware.
Microphone, please.
Phasing the gas central heating system out by 2035, which is about the time these will come for replacement. I think the life is 15 to 20 years. There's quite a few government statements saying they want all new buildings erected again. The wording was will not have to be retrofitted in the future. I don't exactly know what retrofitting in the future, but it means in that context, and like a lot of government statements, but it clearly means that they want to have something built into the fabric of it, so that it's not going to be a major cost element to refit the whole system to cope with non-gas central heating. Have you considered that, and will that be part of what you're doing?
I don't know whether it's permissible, but my colleague sat behind me is our technical director. He can tell you how houses are built upside down, inside out, and he would know what the answer to that question is. So I could make some.
I'm perfectly prepared for your colleague to come forward and answer the question.
Slater. Paul Slater.
Good evening. Yes, Paul Slater, Director with Belt PTOs. Yes, just to pick up on those points. Our houses are actually insulated over and above current build regulations. We want to go that bit further. As my colleague said, we have a new set of regulations coming out next year, Untitled building regulations, which we are waiting for a bated breath. We still don't know exactly what we're going to do. Our houses are future-proofed with regards to excessive amounts of insulation. We generally use a wet gas-fired system, so our radiators have hot water pumping around them. So the majority of the heating system could be then changed to accommodate a ground source heater, an air source heater, which could be located externally. So whilst the boiler would be made redundant, hopefully the hot water cylinder and radiators or pipework property would be future-proof, so that wouldn't have to be updated.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your expertise. Any other questions from members? In which case, thank you very much, Mr. Walker, and we'll now move into debate. And again, I'm looking to ward members if they want to speak first, and which County Gordon Brown. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Not used to these microphones for the last 18 months. Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to note this site already has approval for 35 dwellings, and that was approved back in 2019. So that we're not discussing whether or not there should be a planning approval. The only issue is tonight is what's in front of us in terms of the detail and design. It's interesting to note, though, in that particular application, there were only 6 conditions for that approval. Tonight we have more than 20. Which is interesting, and I'll come to those shortly. The comments I would like to make are in relation to a number of issues, and maybe the questions, and maybe Mr. Johnson can pick them up and respond to them in due course. And that is in relation to the issues around the infiltration tanks. I'm very concerned about this issue of flooding along the high street. We've seen this from our experience at various places along the high street, and particularly of basements flooding in the older homes. And we have, on this side, on the other side, we definitely have that situation particularly. So I'm concerned about that, and I would like to understand from a flood authority the issues across the road, not actually on the site, but across the road, how that can be taken into account, make sure we don't end up with springs appearing in people's gardens on the far side of the road, given the limestone topology or geology in that area. I think I'm also very concerned about housing mix. I think it's been mentioned by Mr. Johnson. I didn't hear a justification from the developer as to why we are not closer to the student housing market assessment for 3-bedroom houses. The suggestion is that should be between 25 and 55, so 30 and 55, we're at 25. We're well short of the 3-bedroom housing requirement, and I think I'm concerned about that. I would be happy to see a condition related to the social renting based on the local housing allowances. I think using average market rent, or 80% of average market rent, is inappropriate in Kent, and we've seen this as an issue because it's influenced very significantly by the value of properties in Stanford. It's only a matter of a couple of miles away, and therefore that does have an impact on the value, and therefore certainly suggest and propose the LHA. Also, the other condition being back-friendly lighting. However, I think going back to the original point on the conditions that are raised, I am surprised in other conditions and the information that's yet to be agreed between the developer and the authority. And I think I'm of the mind that, subject to what I hear later this evening, I would be looking to have or to seek involvement of the parish council and the ward councillors in the finalisation of a number of the outstanding documents that have to be agreed with the developer. And those in particular are the construction management plan, as pointed by my colleague, the noise mitigation picture, that is correct, the boundary treatment, the cut and fill details, the ground levels in particular, there's no overlooking because we haven't seen that in any detail, and landscaping, and I know the issues around the landscaping, particularly trees and the location of those, and making sure those all fit in. So those are areas that I know the parish council is very keen on, and I would certainly like to suggest that possibly at the end of this meeting, Chair. So that's the position from my point of view, picking up the points made by the parish council.
Thank you very much. Would you like some in that, Councillor Craig? Or would you soon come later?
I'll come in after the next one.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Becky.
Yes, I'd like to give a little bit of support to Councillor Brown on the input of board members and the parish council, only from my own personal experience through conditions within some applications that have happened in Griffin, which are coming up, and some of the applications that came to the last committee meeting. I think some of the issues, particularly around, in my case, the flooding, which really does concern me. I think both the ward member and the parish have to be 100% happy that the mitigation is in place through those conditions to ensure that there is not a future potential, in inverted commas, disaster for surrounding properties and the high street. So I would certainly support that any conditions will be to improve of the parish and the ward members in consultation with the officers.
Thank you very much. Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, as someone who was involved in the previous application, when we approved the 35 dwellings. That I thought actually sat well on the site. We're now being asked, due to government policy, to increase the number of houses from 35 to 50, which I believe is overdevelopment of this site. Also, there are going to be 2.5-storey properties, which again, from my knowledge of Kent, there are very few 2.5-storey properties which will look like that in the village. Also, the fact that the chimneys will be there for decoration rather than for use, which I say, if we're talking about future-proofing the building, I think it would help, because we have had this in the past. I can remember I asked the question, we were talking about Barleythorpe, where they put plastic, or well, not plastic, but replica chimneys onto roofs, which does actually deny residents the opportunity of burning. There are all sorts of materials that can be burnt safely now in order to heat the home, so they're totally reliant on radiators. So again, I'm not too happy about that. I'm happy to hear about the fact they're going to be insulated. I welcome the comments about the ward members being involved in this, because, as I say, it is a very sensitive site, and the parish council spoke eloquently about their concerns, and I think they need to certainly be given further opportunity to comment. Construction traffic must come from the east, and that's one good thing about the situation of the site. It is actually close to the A1, it's on the edge of the village. And so they won't have to come through the village. And there are many pinch points further west. Conditions on electric charging are welcome. Conditions on perhaps the bus service. Conditions on the school. There are many. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done on this, because it's going to increase the population of the village considerably. I say I wait to hear what everybody else has to say. I still have concerns about it. I'll wait and hear what everybody else says.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. One for Mr. Johnson, I think. Are there any examples elsewhere in Rutland with the sites of the same density of housing as proposed here?
So I did a quick look this afternoon just to have a look around. I think there are examples, certainly in sort of Oakham and the new housing developments around Oakham. I also had a look in Catton itself to see what the sort of densities were around there. Most of the densities in Catton are lower. There are areas, I think it was around Manor Green that I saw, where there was quite a lot of terraced properties still that were quite high, and they were probably around the sort of up to the 38, 40 mark, so similar. Again, it's always difficult when you're calculating the density, because it's how much of the surrounding land and road network do you include. The more I include, the lower the density goes down. But they are obviously clearly higher density because of the terraced properties.
Any other councillor? Councillor Cross.
Mr. Chairman, I think I must clarify what I said earlier on about policies. Obviously, we're talking about car parking around our estates, and these are government dictates that tell our officers how many cars are allowed on each house. It's about 1.2, which is quite ridiculous, which is why I said what I said. Then we come on to government policies again, and my colleague next to me, Mark here, was mentioning about the lack of future-proofing when it comes to heating. It's all very well going down the government line of one source of heating or another that they dictate. However, many people may not be able to afford what is going to be provided in the future to heat their homes. And therefore, I do believe that it is most unfortunate that chimneys are not working chimneys. I welcome the fact that there will be a suggestion for our planning officers to discuss further details with not only the ward members, but members of the parish council. When we touch on a different sort of heating from gas, yes, it's going to be future-proof. So therefore, the diameter of the heating pipes will have to be twice as large as one uses for traditional heating, because the water in air source heating systems is much lower in calorific value. Oh dear. I always seem to moan, Mr. Chairman. We have a potentially lovely site there, and I am saddened that we don't really have details of the architecture that will be put there. And I fear that without such detail, we're not really able to judge what the finished product will look like. I just hope that from what the applicant representative said, being a local person, that it will be suitable but varied, and not just another housing estate plonked alongside our villages, because our villages are very, very special, and architecture to me means an awful lot, and it also means much to those that are living within the properties. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I can turn my microphone.
Councillor Regan. I would like to agree with my friend, Mr. Cross, about the design. It is quite nervous to make it approve without seeing it, and I see in a development in Greece, very close to my heart, where there is mixed development, but very much what I would call a two-tier system, with the affordable housing standing out like a sore thumb in red brick, and the higher value homes in a stone structure. I'm also very concerned that no one's really brought it up, but Justin originally said that the affordable housing was potted around the site. From what I can see, what was mentioned, it may well be so, but there is certainly a preponderance of them in the northwest corner, where the noise and the dust is highest. And to me, that doesn't feel right, that just because somebody's in an affordable house, they should have a lower standard of living compared to the others. So I very much have concern over not seeing the design and the finish, and I'm concerned about the ghettoisation of the affordable housing in one corner.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Any other councillors wish to add anything else? I would just comment, sorry, just, yeah.
Can I just come in on the design side of things? Obviously, I've got plans up here which show some of the house types in terms of the design, which as officers we don't consider to be inappropriate for this location. Concern was raised about the actual materials and design. All of the properties on the site are proposed to be either the light blue around the frontages is the stone, and then a buff brick. So in terms of materials, there is a mix. There are a number of the affordable housing properties that are being to have stone frontages, in particular these ones at the western end of the site, and then these at the eastern end of the site, are proposed to be stone. Stone material has been chosen not by the fact that the properties are market or affordable, but more in relation to where they are and the frontages and how prominent they are within the scheme. So I think it is reasonable that the affordable housing will not necessarily stand out from the market. That's something that we, as officers, did have quite a bit of time in discussion with the applicants about. And I take on board the comments about the pepper potting. We, obviously, as officers, we have sought to get them mixed around the site. The applicant did indicate that some of the registered providers do like some of them to be grouped together for their ease of maintenance of them. They are around the site, but I admit, yes, there is a grouping towards this end of the site. But we did again have discussions with the applicant about all those issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Councillor Cross.
My comments were not made against our officers or anything like that. This is a responsibility that we as a council must take on board to make certain that these developments are, dreadful words, fit for purpose. And I take on board that the facings will be seen as stone. However, my belief is that even those families living in the rear houses should be able to live or have the opportunity to live in a house with some character. That is their home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't.
Thank you, Councillor Cross. I would just add one or two comments entirely to endorse that, that something should be there that complements with me the existing Chetham vernacular, and I entirely agree with Councillor Beggy that any suggestion, and I don't use the term lightly, of ghetto as far as affordability is concerned, is something which we as a council have resisted over a whole number of applications, that the affordable housing should not be distinguished from the outside, from private sector ones, and that they should be spread out over the entire development, is the broad principle. I'm also concerned with other members about the flooding issue. As this council's representative on the Environment Agency, I'm very well aware of that, and I must admit that I was surprised that that hadn't been resolved before the application came to us tonight. I would have expected that. Having said all of that, the principle of development has been established, and we've heard the arguments about density. What I would entirely endorse, and going back to my major personal concern about the flooding, that this condition is met, and the various other conditions that are in that addendum report, and I would suggest that when we're about to move to the proposal, whatever form that takes, if we are minded to approve, we put it as strongly as we possibly can that should be in consultation with the ward members, whether you need an actual presence of the parish council or whether they can convey the feelings of the parish council is entirely up to them. But in conjunction with our planning officer, the ward members, my feeling would be it should be as strong as no development should take place until there is a satisfactory outcome to those, well, I won't say negotiations, but consultation. That would be, but I'm waiting now for the proposal. Councillor Wood, that's. I'm sorry, I've got the legal officer coming in.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, before we move to potential proposals, to just make a couple of comments about that we made about conditions that you may potentially like to attach to the consent of granted tonight. The Chair was just set out a proposal in relation to consultation with parish council and potential board members. I don't take issue with that in the slightest. I just would remind members that flooding is a technical issue, and we have to be mindful of the fact that the local flood authorities do not take issue, and therefore with regards to any discharge of condition, board members in the parish council will need to be mindful of the fact that this will be a technical condition that would require the local flood authority to give their comments. And the other thing that was mentioned was with regards to electric charging. Now, obviously, I don't know whether this is going to be proposed as a condition, but what I would say is that my understanding is that this authority does not have a policy to require electric charging points, and therefore I would urge members to consider whether that would be reasonable, because if you consider it is, then really every single residential development in the administrative area should be having the same condition. There is no policy or plan to do so, albeit I understand that the applicant will be prepared to do so for the need test of the condition, will it meet the legal test for conditions. And then the final point was with regards to the social housing. I think Councillor Gordon-Brown, you mentioned about rent levels for social housing. Just to flag that the affordable housing will be controlled by Section 106 agreement that will need to be entered into, and therefore all elements regarding rent levels, etc., would be controlled by that and would not need to be controlled by petition.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure the proposer will take that into account. Thank you for your advice. Councillor Gordon-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I fully recognise the comments made by our legal advisor. Particularly, I think what the ward members and the parish council would wish to understand is that all these aspects have been carefully considered, and that in considering them, they understand the implications of each of the decisions. I think that's where things, particularly the construction management plan, mentioned by many of our colleagues. The flooding, yeah, absolutely is an issue, but it's one which sadly we have real experience of in the village, and therefore we want to make sure that we don't create a legacy down the road in 10, 20, 30 years' time. It would not be a legacy I want to leave for Ketton. So on that basis, Chair, I would like to move that the application be approved, but with certain provisos. One, that a number of the conditions be discussed or consulted upon by the authority with the ward councillors and the parish council on particularly landscaping, ground levels, cut and fill details, boundary treatment, construction management plan, noise mitigation. That our colleagues who, when negotiating the Section 106 agreement, take cognizance of the local housing allowances, given the issues around affordable rents. That one of the conditions that we add, and I think it was accepted by the developer, was that friendly lighting would be included within that. And electric charging, I think again the developer said that he was prepared to do it to a great extent, and therefore to make sure that that was available. I think that's a discussion to be had between the officers and the developer as part of the finalisation of those details. So I think that would be the principle of the proposal I put forward, Chair.
Sorry, Chairman, can I just clarify the conditions? So you went through the quite quickly.
Sorry.
The conditions that you want to go close to?
Yeah, I think it's landscaping, ground levels, because the overlooking issue, just make sure we're happy with that, particularly to the west. Cut and fill details, that's a minor point, it's a technical point again, but just to make sure we're aware of those. Boundary treatment is a very important one, and the noise mitigation, I think that's well down the road. Again, just to understand, so that the parish council has full understanding, so that if anybody comes back to complain at a later date, they fully understand what has been agreed and what has not been.
Construction management plan was one as well, was it?
It was very important, construction management plan. I think the condition is very good, but it's just to involve the parish council who have got a lot of local knowledge, and to make sure that that construction management plan is effective for the village of Ketton.
Okay, so I've got all of those, then I've got Section 106 for the affordable housing side of things, back condition, condition about backlighting, and then the electric charging points.
Yes, is this a secondary, Councillor?
Well, there's a condition as well with regards to the orchard.
But that's not like
Okay, well, I will second.
Second, thank you. We duly proposed and seconded on the detail that we just had. I'll ask all those in favour, please. So it's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. In that case, we'll move on to the second Ketton thing. And I would preface that by saying both the members and to delegates, better left to the officer, that a lot of the major issues have been covered. This is, in my experience, certainly a very unusual application in the sense that we've really got two interlinked sites with the principles very much the same. But having said that, Mr. Johnson, thank you.
Chairman, I'll try and be as quick but as thorough as necessary on this one. So this is for the erection of 21 dwellings, land adjacent to Chater House, the High Street. This is the application site, which you can see here. And part of the site is allocated in the site allocations policy, and then there's a section that's just here, which I believe is outside the allocation and is covered by an existing orchard. This is an aerial photograph of the site, and you can see the orchard there at the moment. There was, I think, some time ago, a request to consider degrowing the orchard, and that went through the assessment process, and it was determined that it wasn't worthy of tree preservation order. This is the scheme that is proposed, which is predominantly 3 and 4 bed properties. So I'm just trying to find my notes now. There we go. Sorry, predominantly 4 and 5 bed properties. Sorry, I know that wrong. And as we've already said, the proposal is to put the affordable housing element 56 from this site on the application site that's just been approved. Just you can see the layout here. I'll just try and find the relevant materials. This is probably the better one. So what we have here is a main access road going through. And what we've tried to accommodate here is stone property frontages, again, stone and brick, all of the light blue frontages and elevations shown there are to be in stone, with then the others being in buff brick. We've also got a low stone wall frontage to be put in along many of the properties on the access road, and also where there are key frontage boundary treatments. Again, we've had discussions with the applicant about securing those as walls rather than fences, which is more in keeping with the village. Again, in terms of house types, similar as before, these are obviously large properties, but in terms of design and theme, stone, roof, buff brick, and then elements of slate roof. This is the application side is on the right hand side here. And this is another one looking back up the high street. This is showing roughly where the entrance to the site is in here, and you can see this is the footpath that leads up to the club to the rear of the site. This is again a footpath that runs through, and you can see it's got hedgerow on both sides. Down. This shows the club at the rear of the site. And this is a shot looking across the application site, which you can see the green field, some properties adjacent to it. Again, looking across this to the west. Some of the adjacent properties. Looking across the site again, you can see the boundary treatments, and then you've got this shows some of the trees in the orchard that are to be relocated. Similar policies to the previous scheme, as we've already said, it is an allocated site. The housing density, as we've already discussed for villages in this sort of area, are 30 dwellings to the hectare. This site is proposing 21 dwellings on it, so it's slightly under the density for this part. But again, it's considered that a lot of time has been spent on the layout, the design, the materials, and that it is an appropriate form of development, taking into into account our 5-year housing land supply position and the relevant policies of the NPPF. Housing mix. This again, there is an issue with the housing mix for this site. Clearly, with them being larger 4 and 5 bedroom properties, there's less of a mix compared to the site that we've just considered. But when you take the development, both developments together, the mix for Ketton there is a reasonable mix of housing types, but it still doesn't comply with the relevant policy in CS10, which talks about the housing mix that's set out in the strategic housing assessment, and this would not meet that. But again, the issue, as I've said before, members will need to weigh that up against the provision of the housing against it not quite being the relevant mix that we would usually look for. I've talked about the design, and a lot of time was spent trying to get the properties so that they provide a frontage to all the main roads and the estate road that goes through the site. So windows overlooking, getting stone elevations to those, and we think that a lot of work has been done to get that to the right place. We've also discussed chimney details, adding those in again, so that they are more in keeping with the more traditional properties within the village, which obviously have that chimney detail. I've talked about facing the development. I've talked about the low stone walls fronting the boundary treatment. There has been concern about the pedestrian route to Ketton Sports and Community Centre. At the moment, I showed that being down the eastern side of the site, and it runs between 2 hedgerows. We have moved it in discussions with the applicant to go along the estate road through the site, and then in the top corner. So the idea is that you walk to get access to the site, you walk through the footpath through the site, and then it will be signposted, and we've spent a lot of time in designing this area so that it is more open, so that you can see and go through in a fairly well lit and appropriate spot. The concern was, and it was a real concern, was that if you have the footpath that goes down the back here, it would be a particularly unattractive and not well lit or desirable place to walk in terms of what would likely be a 2 metre high post-boarded fence along there for quite a narrow gap. We felt that this was the most appropriate solution to the scheme, and like I say, as officers, we spent a lot of time trying to get it so that there is a safe link through, but that there is a link to still retain to the club. So I don't believe it's a public foot that it is just across the private land. So in terms of heritage, again, we've considered that it is less than substantial harm, and that harm then has to be weighed and balanced against the wider public benefits. And again, in this case, the wider public benefits are the contribution that it makes towards our housing supply, and also the provision of the affordable housing. There's also ecological and biodiversity, again, benefits that I'll come on to in a minute. In terms of residential amenity, given the separation distances, then there will be no overlooking or overshadowing or dominance. Landscape, we've sought to retain perimeter trees and hedgerows, and that will be enhanced with, again, landscaping as required by condition. Highways have considered the access arrangements and have raised no objections and consider it to comply with policy. ecology, as we've already talked about, the biodiversity net gain issue that's set out in the NPPF. In this instance, the proposal is to offset the loss of the orchard with compensation on grassland covering approximately 1.3 hectares on adjacent to home farm. 0.4 hectares would be grassland, which would be enhanced as traditional orchard, so that would be planted up as the orchard, and then the rest would be enhanced with natural grassland and species-rich lowland meadow, and that would be secured via a Section 96 agreement and for a binding 30-year requirement in terms of the ongoing maintenance of that. And our ecologist has confirmed that that would comply with the requirements of the biodiversity net gain. Just so members can see where it's going. The application site is here, and the proposed location for the grassland biodiversity placement is this area highlighted in yellow. And that will be secured, as I've said, by way of condition. We've talked about the affordable housing already. And so, in conclusion, it's an allocated site, is within the planned limits of development, provides us 6 affordable housing in line with our policy. And the main conflict on this site really is in relation to the housing mix, which, as I've already said and discussed, that is something that the members need to weigh in the balance against providing much needed housing. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Mrs. Kelly. Just before you start, you're down on this occasion as a member of the public. Are you speaking as an individual?
Yes, just to make it very clear, I'm speaking as an individual because I'm a direct neighbour of the proposed development, and the property has the longest boundary with the property. But I would point you to your addendum where you've got the objections and concerns of Peckham Parish Council, which I also fully endorse. Just to give you a bit of history, as you see, the site consists of a field from the High Street, and behind it a traditional orchard. Traditional orchards are biodiversity action priority habitats. The field was designated in the 2001 Rural Plan as an area of important open space. This designation was removed in 2012, just prior to the site being offered up in a call for sites. And at the same time, the orchard was newly included within the planned limits of development. The site has an 85-metre boundary with our property. We have requested but not received written confirmation from the developer that this boundary is alongside our private garden and not allotments, as described in both the original and updated proposals. All of our garden is used extensively and frequently by our multi-generation family of 7. It's not just the bit by the house. There are 4 houses planned along this boundary, and we fear that the 2 tallest will look directly into our garden, as all the mature trees along that section are due to be removed. In January 21, we requested a site section to assess the impact, and none has been provided. We also note that in the proposals for the development of Home Farm in the same ownership, a site section was requested by a neighbouring property in order to assess any overlooking of their amenities. That was provided within 5 days of the request. 5 metres of our boundary is 50 metres of our boundary is of 1.5 to 3 metre high limestone wall. In January 21, we requested that before any works within 5 metres of the wall, measures should be planned to strengthen the wall, provide protection against wind and weather, and a commitment to repair any damage that may occur during site clearance and construction. We've had no reassurances on that score. As you heard, 23 out of 47 trees and groups of trees, including most of the orchard trees, are due to be felled. it is essential that all the remaining trees are protected during construction. As far as we can tell, there are no plans for tree root protection measures to be in place. The orchard, as well as our garden and other surrounding areas, are prime foraging areas for bats. Therefore, again, like the other side, it's essential that bat-friendly lighting should be in place, together with the condition that it can't be removed. Reptile surveys suggest mitigation for loss of their habitat by hedgerow planting and unmown grass corridors. If the permissive path along the northeast boundary was to be retained along its length, it would have that hedging and rough grass and serve as a wildlife corridor. We understand about the proposed grassland and orchard and long paddock beyond home farm, but it will be many years before this replacement orchard and area achieves the biodiversity net gain. And it really is important that this replacement orchard becomes a community asset in perpetuity, and that it is planting and management is fully funded by the developer for at least 30 years. Finally, we also support Kent Parish Council's objections as detailed in the addendum concerning lack of affordable and smaller houses, the use of red brick, which I think is still in there, the rerouting of the permissive footpath, and concerns with the adequacy of plans to deal with surface water, which could lead to flooding of properties on the opposite side of the road that have drop curbs, and the sellers of the properties close to the site. I believe that a number of the properties close to the site and opposite the site do have sellers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Kate. Again, members, please. It's again a matter of being specific to this slide. I think it's, yeah.
Sure. I'd like to ask Mr. Kidd about protection of the wall. Have you had discussions with the developer about protection of the wall?
No, we put it in our comments twice and not had any feedback at all on this. But we note that in the development of Long Farm of the High Street, a wall of a neighbouring property actually fell down during construction of the site adjacent.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Kane, the trees that are going to be felled, are they boundary trees as well as the orchard trees?
Yes, the orchard consists of older, probably 100-year plus fruit trees around the edge, and younger ones, 40 plus, in the middle. So the trees along part of our boundary are due to be removed. Yes, so it will produce a gap, if you like.
Just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, are these all fruit trees that are due to be removed?
It's definitely one fruit tree, some. I think there probably are all fruit trees, I'm not sure. Yeah, yes.
Councillor Ross. Sorry, Councillor Ross.
Sorry, just looking at my notes there, Mr. Chairman. Memory.
I know my focus, yes.
Your suggestion about the footpath, I presume that at the moment the footpath will be annihilated and moved into the development, or will the old footpath remain as it is?
It's a permissive footpath, and therefore in the proposals, the footpath will be incorporated into the back gardens of the new properties. At the moment, it is a footpath with hedges both sides as described and grass. There is no lighting. It is bounded by the gardens to the east of Molesworth Bungalows and Chayton Mews, and there have never been any issues about the fact it's not lit. There is another similar footpath, this time public right of way, in another part of the village, which goes along the backs of gardens, again non-lit. We've never had any issues.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Just a question with regards to the conservation area. I understand that elements of the conservation area actually go through the site as well. Is it the boundary of the conservation area? So
yes, it's bounded on the east by the Firs section of the conservation area, and on the west by the central village, which have different characters actually.
So the orchard, part of the orchard is actually in the conservation.
I don't think the orchard is.
Oh.
Any other members? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Gay.
Thank you.
Mr. Hall. And when you're ready.
Chairman, thank you, members of council. It's me again. I'll start my presentation by commending the officers' report to committee. Again, we've spent 15 months or so working very hard with the officers. Things like the footpath, should it be to the east, should it be internal? We originally had it to the east, then officers suggested internal, then put the east and flipped the houses round to face onto Molesworth bungalows, which was then gross overlooking, so let's put it back in the middle. So it has flipped and flopped, and we have, I would suggest, worked together tirelessly to find the solutions to these things. The report itself, the committee report for you, comments on good quality design, use of key buildings, materials that will assimilate the scheme into the village and the conservation area. The design of the road, again, is as a lane with low upstand curbs, and there's incorporation of trees, and there has been some discussion with the parish council, replacement of apple trees, albeit crab apple, I think was the comment, rather than fruit trees, because they're simpler to manage and maintain, and then there's street trees. The amenities of neighbouring residents have been thoroughly considered, and the plot positions and use of extensive gardens, deep gardens, ensures no adverse impact nor loss of amenity to the neighbours. I take Mary's point about the 50 metres to the rear of her property, but there is another 35 metres nearer to the house. It's a very fortunate and great position to be in, but even those 4 properties overlooking there are sufficiently distant away, and there is a 2.5-storey unit, but it has roof lights rather than dormers, so the views will be up rather than out and across the that tail end of the garden. There are mature trees, where feasible they are to be retained and incorporated into the development. We are proposing to plant street trees, as I say, and enhance the existing boundary planting to further enhance the development and replace the trees that do need to come out. Some of them are in poor health, and others are simply in the way on this allocated site. The density of the scheme here is 17 to the hectare. It has an allocation for 28 to the hectare. The proposal is characterised by large homes on large plots, as is the character of this part of the settlement. We mentioned the footpath linked to the sports club. The proposal, as I say, is now to incorporate it through the centre, following the footpath with the link, which will be illuminated. It will be within the residence management company. It will be maintained in perpetuity, and rights of access through via the residence management company will be assured. Signposting at the bottom, at the top, and as you go through the scheme, this can be agreed, but will be provided to ensure it's an obvious route. We have moved the officers, as Justin says, the houses back and open the space up around it to ensure there is visibility for pedestrians coming into and through the scheme. We work with the highways officer as well to ensure the crossing from the footpath from the club onto the main footpath through the site is safe and secure as well, and easily identifiable. Biodiversity net gain elements. Again, we have a 3-acre site here, and we have 3.3 acres of new site with the orchard, and it is an intrinsic part of this scheme, the replacement orchard. We have a draft 106 with the authority, and our landowner is more than content to offer up that land. We will be paying for the planting and the provision of it, and there will be monies in the pot within the 106 to ensure its maintenance over that 30-year period. So we believe, and officers have certainly confirmed, it's a satisfactory way according to the legislation, and the provision provisions within the legislation for biodiversity net gain benefit and how it should be provided.
I remember
Just the affordable housing we've already said is provided. Still from the sites, just over 500,000, 552k. Again, the lead local authority have approved the scheme, which potentially we will touch on going forward. Tree office supports the scheme. There is protection. There is no red brick on here. It will be limestone and buff. Back boxes, backlighting, part and parcel of this. And in conclusion, Chesterfield will make a considerable and positive contributions to housing shortage in the district. And I would say, again, commend the office report to you all to the committee. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Councillor Cross and then Councillor Payne.
Me again.
Yeah.
Passionate about trees, about orchards, the importance to the environment. Had you considered actually moving the old orchard trees onto the new site? This can be done with some modern machinery.
Oh, sorry, I thought you
I was just saying, I'm going to pause.
simplistically, there have been discussions with the Stanford Orchard Group with Adam Kay, and it hasn't been the solution, and it hasn't been. We've so talked about grafting the one or two of the species there that are of particular interest, but we haven't considered or concluded that that was the solution to pick up and move a number or any of those trees.
Very pleased that you haven't concluded those discussions, and therefore I would urge you to look further into actually relocating some of those valuable trees. And obviously, if you can take some samples off them and get them grafted onto other species, it would, onto rootstock, it would be invaluable to the genetic value of those trees. My pet hate, your roofing materials. Why can we not use the artificial polyester stone, which just sort of hones down into the local vernacular?
Again, in liaison with officers, it hasn't been any point that has been labelled or brought forward. We have a more slate effect, if you like, the grey roof tiles against the stone rather than the artificial polyesters, which I would suggest conservation officers maybe feel detract from the true polyester that you have at the frontage surrounding the property. I'm putting words into their mouth, but we haven't gone down the artificial polyester route. It's simply not been a point raised for discussion.
But you're not averse to considering it?
I think I would suggest maybe on if we're going to go down that route, it would be limited property rather than all. It is prohibitively expensive.
So are the houses.
Councillor.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
What I was going to read and say, not to preempt what you may decide in a few minutes, we have very clearly said that the first application is subject to consultation with the ward members and the parish council and the officers. I cannot personally see how the two sites in this respect can be divided, and therefore I would have thought, rather than get bogged down in the details here, you're making very valid points, but rather than get bogged down in the details, mindful of the time, I don't wish to curtail your debate on this, but I do think we might find ourselves dealing with unnecessary detail at this point. I think we have put a safeguard in on that first application. Councillor Cross.
I'll draw stumps there, Mr. Chairman, but thank you very much indeed.
Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask why Mrs. Cakes has been provided with a site section plan and why there's been no discussion about reinforcing the wall, the boundary wall.
If I'm honest, the wall point, we've been at this for so long, it's coming as a consultation response, it will have been read and we have dealt with a number of responses at that particular time when I will apologise to Mary, but it isn't something that I've picked up. It's my fault. It's simply me not picking the phone up and having a conversation. But I would add that any repair works that are needed to be done on our side, and I suspect it's almost by pairing, unless from a title perspective it's T-marked either way, which our walls quite often aren't. But if there are repairs that are required to be done, we will have to do those anyway for the safety of our occupiers. We can't leave a wobbly wall in place inside a house and not deal with the potential health and safety issue.
How do we ensure that? How do we ensure that? How do we ensure it's dealt with?
It will be part of the landscape and boundary treatments details, I would suggest, there's a condition already in place for those.
And how about the site section plan that's been asked?
We haven't got topographical survey of Mary's site, so we could draw our site, but then it just tails off into who knows what their ground, the heights of their land are. I mean, the whole thing, as well, you know, rises northwards, and the houses will step and stagger as they go up the across the site. I would suggest that the distance that they are away from the private residential area, the immediate amenity space around the property, albeit the whole garden is used, but they are so far away, those properties, and they are distant from the boundary to an extent that any normal dimension with respect to overlooking and oppressive nature of buildings are simply addressed by the location of the properties here, and their bulk and mass is diminished somewhat by their distance away from the main body of the property.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is regards to the footpath up to the community centre, to the sports centre, sorry. Now, the hedges either side. Well, that can come in the discussion, that can come in the debate. I can ask the opposite picture.
Sorry.
Yeah. My question is with regards to the footpath and the hedges either side of the footpath. Now, they are an important element to the biodiversity of the area as well, given that birds will use them for nesting, and they are a wildlife corridor as well, because beyond that area it goes into open country, well, it goes into the sports centre, and then beyond there, open countryside to the west, I think, and then into the quarry. But I am disappointed that is proposed to be grubbed out, those two, the hedges either side.
Sorry, the one on the abutting the cedar houses is there, that would remain and be enhanced.
So you're keeping one side of it?
Yes, the internal face, as you were going up there to the sports centre, your left-hand side, that will come out, the gardens will extend to the hedge, I'm looking at it the right way, the hedge on the right will stay, the hedge on the left, which is less than, it's bitty, it's piecemeal, and I suggest that the posts of the fence are probably where the ivy and the like are, that will come out. But the idea is to enhance the boundary with the bungalow property. So they'll be incorporated into the boundaries of the buildings you're proposing to. Yes, keep as much green as we can on the boundaries of the site. But you can't keep the footpath because, as I say, it presumably make the gardens small. It moves the whole scheme into the site. I think that the key issue with the footpath, as I say, when we started off, we had it in that position, and it suggested it'd come out, and we didn't do that, and then it used to and fro. As just alluded to, if you keep it there, it creates a much, you will end up with boundary fences because people will want their privacy, or you end up with a post of iron hedge But again, that will be allowed to grow because people who live in those houses won't want people to see people walking behind them. So you'll end up with something, the footpath, in my view, will become quite narrow and it isn't illuminated at the moment. So it could become dark, a dark and unattractive space. In conclusion, with the discussion we had, by moving it into the middle of the site, it will be illuminated. The link through, we only have one access point into it from Sports Club, which is the due north boundary, so we can't shift it anywhere else. It has to come into there because that's the only place where rights exist. And the illumination, the safety, security, and the observation that you get for the residents plus the people.
Okay, I'm mindful of the time, so thank you for the extended explanation. One last thing is parking. Now, I have concerns because people do use the sports club a lot. Now, what if cars are to park and you could actually completely log jam the whole development as they're going up into the extended new footpath?
I would hope, and I would suggest that that becomes the pedestrian dominant route. People in cars will actually drive the extra, whatever it is, 150, 250 metres round, rather than look to park. They can't park here, they may park on the main road, cause an obstruction. It would be unneighbourly, it would be rude, and so maybe to park in front of people's driveways, block them in, so on and so forth. One would have to rely upon good manners and general decency, I would suggest.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walker. Oh, sorry, I've got one more.
I'll be quick. Yeah, Franz.
Good. Chair, just on the same point, the infiltration tank in the Spickle one, as you pointed out, is right down the centre of the road. And I have the same concerns about that, and I think if I pick up the chairman's comments, we'll look at that later. The only question I would ask is why did swales and increased biodiversity here, having swales rather than subterranean tanks?
Well, in part because of the slope of the site, 9 metres top to bottom, and if you build a slope, a swale in the slope, it just was, you end up having to people it down.
You can do them across the way rather than down the river. I think I'm concerned that it's easy just to put this underground rather than looking at a biodiversity approach of having it across the site, and that worries me to some extent. The other item that I just wanted to pick up was there's a speed indicator on the main road, and I presume, I know there's a condition on it, but I presume you'll be picking up all across the road.
It'll be like TRO.
It's not identified in the condition, but I just want to check that. That's all I have to say, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Open to the debate. Now, again, members, mindful of time, I don't want to get ahead of you, but if you could be specific to points that are different to the ones already raised on the principle. Having said that, I'm asking the board member to kick off.
Thank you, I'll keep it very much to the point. I think the same points arise here as on the other application, particularly in relation to the landscape plan. I think this is very important. I think the developer pointed that out this evening. Boundary treatments are very important in this site again, to the points we've heard earlier. The ground level changes are important, and tree and hedgerow retention are also important. So I think all those points, which are conditions in the application or in the recommendations from officers, I think I'll come to those in a minute. I think I'm delighted to see that after 30 years, the Stamford Orchard Company will be responsible for the long-term maintenance and, well, we shall look at who's going to have that as part of Section 106 agreement. I see a shaking ahead there. We've mentioned the section, the infiltration, and that. So those are the only points, but again, I would ask in relation to points you made about the consultation with Ward Councillors and Parish Council on those key points. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor
Just a quick point. I don't know the locality as well as some. I've had a lot of experience within Oakham about proximity of housing to sports clubs, and throughout Leicestershire and Oakham, there's been historically when new development's gone up, pressure put on local sports clubs. For example, the example is Quenebra, where they had to find a six-figure figure to put netting around the boundary to stop cricketers entering the site. I know at Oakham we get a lot of issues about complaints about children laughing and having fun while playing cricket. I don't know if there's anything we can do about this, but I do have a concern for the sports club that when people move in, it will bring an undue pressure on a local amenity. And having measured the distance from the end of one wicket at 68 metres to the nearest garden, and having witnessed the T20 final where it was 80 metres over the pavilion, it potentially could become an issue putting financial pressure onto the sports club.
I think we're going into the territory of getting Butler to come for a celebrity cricket match. Yes, other members, please. If not, I'm looking for a proposal.
Chair, I propose that we approve the plan as presented by the officers tonight, but with similar conditions in relation to the involvement of the ward councils and parish council, in relation particularly to the landscape plan, boundary treatments, details of ground level changes, tree and hedgerow retention, and which also in terms of ground level changes, the overlooking question, making sure that that's clear. Those I think are the key points that I would like to bring up, and also the protection of the wall. But those are the key points.
Do you want something on the replacement orchard and the character of that?
I think that would be part, that would be part of the
original condition
of the conditions in relation to landscaping and Section 106 agreement, which would be a separate agreement by the parties.
Thank you. So we've got a proposal, may I have a second, please? Second, Councillor Page, and all those in favour, please. Abstentions?
Recorded, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. At this point, members of the public, I will have a very brief adjournment before we move on to the next point. So if you do not wish to hear our deliberations on the Victoria Hall, please feel free to go now. Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson.
Thanks, Chairman. So the next two applications relate to the refurbishment and conversion of Victoria Hall to a two-screen cinema with a cafe and multi-use lounge and ancillary facilities. And this is at Victoria Hall, 39 High Street, Oakham. This first application that I'm presenting is the full application, and the one after will be the listed building. So this just shows the application site. It's the Victoria Hall is a Grade 2 listed building, and it's located in the centre of Oakham on the High Street. See that on red there. And it's surrounded predominantly by commercial, retail, and recreational and residential land uses. The closest residential properties include local school boarding facilities, which are to the north, and then also there are some flats located to the east of the site as well. And it's located within Oakham Conservation Area. This is just an aerial shot of proposals. So the application proposes to convert the Victoria Hall into a boutique cinema with two screens, 89 seats in one auditorium and 30 in another, and to have two further spaces which will be used for complementary community activities. So this is the ground floor plan, where you can see cafe and the general communal spaces. And then at the first floor, you can see the two screens. So this is the main screen, and this is the second screen to the rear. So the cafe would have seats for approximately 40. The proposed building works, there's a number of works proposed, and they include limited changes to the high street frontage. Go through some of the proposed elevation. So the main entrance doors are retained with glazed screen with automatic doors installed. There's black metal handrails will be installed to the side of the existing steps. And there's also a step-free access which is from Church Street, which is around the side of the building. There's no proposals to change the ground and first floor windows, but there is proposals to include internal acoustic upgrading, and that also includes additional secondary glazing at first floor level. And there's also a number of alterations which include the removal of several doorways, and obviously the installation of the 2 new screens and the seating arrangement. They are within the existing main hall, and the majority of the alterations that have been done in a reversible manner, and also to minimise impact on the heritage asset. And there's been consultation with the conservation officer, who's raised no objections to the proposals, and following consultation, English Heritage have raised no objections, and Historic England have raised no objections, and they've just advised that it should be determined in accordance with our own conservation officer's advice. There's obviously a sprung floor within the hall, and the idea is to minimise the impact of the proposal. The proposal includes keeping part of the sprung floor visible, and then elements of it would be carpeted as well, but with minimal fixtures and fittings in order to, again, minimise impact on the internal structure and fabric of the building. This is shot just showing the hole in the outside, and where the some railings will be installed and the glazed automatic doors. The proposal is still to keep the canopy, but some alterations, minor alterations to that. Again, setting out the policies here, and a relevant policy in relation to town centre uses, highway safety, traffic, and historic impact. So the proposed development will be located within a primary shopping frontage in Oakham High Street, and proposal therefore is in general accordance with the requirement. The town centre is a sustainable location where leisure uses such as this are actively encouraged. There has been concern raised about the loss of the public facility, and that is obviously one of the things members will need to debate tonight. Although the proposal would still maintain a public facility in itself, which is appropriate to the town centre, there would still be some space available within the building, but the loss of the dance hall and exhibition space is not considered in this case sufficient reason to warrant refusal, as there are other halls and facilities that are available within Oakham that could provide meeting spaces, etc. Some of those would include at the school, the castle on certain days, the museum on certain days, and there are also other facilities around King Centre, etc., that are all available. I think the Scout Hub as well was one that was mentioned to you as well. The design, proposed external alterations are relatively minor and will not have any significant impact on the character and appearance of the post-listed building, therefore complies with the relevant policies. And again, with the street scene as well, will not cause harm to the listed building. In terms of residential amenity, Council's Environmental Health Officer has considered the noise report that has been submitted and has confirmed that there would be no significant adverse impact. Obviously, members have got to remember that the building is already used as a public venue, and which could generate its own noise and disturbance, but the mitigation measures that are proposed with this would mean that it can be suitably controlled through conditions, and there will be no unacceptable adverse impact on residential amenity, especially those closest to the site, which I've already pointed out and are pointed out in the report. Highways matters, and the highways officer has considered the scheme, and there were discussions with the applicant. Clearly there's concern about any potential increase in parking and the impact that would have on town centre car parks. The existing use has to provide 4 car parking spaces for every seat, whereas the proposed use has, is it say 5?
No, one car
Parking space, but sorry, yeah, 1 car parking space for 4 seats for the existing use, and it would be 1 car parking space for 5 seats for the cinema. So the existing use has to actually provide more parking than the proposed cinema does. The applicants also provided sort of indications on their likely parking numbers. Excuse me. The applicants have also provided details of their use numbers as well, and they indicated that they do not consider that the use is likely to ever be a full occupancy. I think they've compared it to other cinemas that is below 30% occupied at most times on average. The other thing to consider is that the existing use can cater for seating for 200 people at the moment, and the proposed cinema will be for, I think it's about 119 or 120, so again, less than the existing uses could potentially do. So again, it is an appropriate use in the town centre. It's a sustainable location where people can use the bus, walk, etc. Don't have to come by car, but there are 3 or 4 car parks nearby, and although there has been concerns raised about the parking, the highways officer has raised no objections following the additional information submitted by the applicant. The proposal would preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area and the host listed building. There's been no objection from Historic England or the conservation officer, and on that basis, recommended for approval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. If I can ask Mr. Peter Jones to come forward. We've got your 3 minutes to present, and then any questions from members. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Peter Jones, and I'm Chairman of the Victoria Hall Trustees. First, I would like to outline the main objectives and aims of the Hall to remove any incorrect ideas. And this is then set out in the original charity documentation of 1899. And there it requires us to provide meeting spaces and uses for the agricultural societies and facilities and other meetings as to how the trustees think fit. Since then, there's been inevitably huge changes, especially in the use of the hall. Meetings, weddings, dances, dinners were very much the common daily, weekly aspect. However, now the community needs seem to have changed considerably in the last 5 to 10 years. Weddings, people go out of town, dinners, AGMs, and all that, have found different locations to go to. And many more suitable venues, hotels, the castle, the museum, or as already mentioned. Our income, therefore, for the upper floor, which has decreased dramatically. However, this has been subsidised in the past by the rents from the ground floor. However, here, the withdrawal in the last 18 months of the 2 main tenants And here we come to a home issue. Rutland County Council and Oakham Town Council has reduced the income by some £20,000, roughly 50% of the total income rate. Then COVID came, another huge reduction in income, especially for the fact that usual meetings, people close contact. So in line with our duties and obligations as trustees, we had to look elsewhere to serve to secure the future of the hall. So we approached Kina because we knew their desire and their attempt in the past to establish a cinema in London. They were both locally based and locally funded, not giant cinema companies from abroad, and they had a good sound business plan. Finally, we felt it was a facility needed in the town and would bring more life and heart to the struggling high street, which we all know well. Reflecting on this, I feel important. It was reflected by the huge support that this application has received, much more than the objective side. Finally, in our discussions with Kina, they have fully agreed to the conditions vital to the hall's aims and objectives. A, providing meeting space free of charge for any agricultural meetings or group meetings. Also, to support other community meetings in the lounge areas and other areas. Continue to support the art and cultural aspect of the hall, both by their programs, a much varied assortment of films, and allowing artists to display their works as they do now in the bar and cafe areas. Also, to lodge a substantial amount of money in an escrow account against the need to return the hall to, as it usually says, its original state in the event they vacate the premises. At this point, I would say it's important to say that the last point is something that the hall at least wants, in much as a lot of the money going into this development is going to improve the facilities and basic heating, lighting, toilet facilities of the hall considerably. And we would not want, should they vacate, it to go back to what we have now, which are all in urgent need of updating, and we have no funds. There are plans for new lighting, heating, and sensitivity. In the hall, there's a list of buildings. All original structures are being retained, we've heard that, and protected. And I understand the conservation officer of the objective site has no objection to those. We also believe that this will be a huge facility and a huge asset to the town generally, and maintain and give heart to the high street. Finally, we believe we have, to the best of our ability, carried out the trustees' duties, acted in the charity's best interest, ensure the charity is accountable, and making charitable resources responsibilities act with reasonable care and skill, comply with the charity's governing document and law. So, and finally, the charity to carry out its purpose for public benefit. We believe this will be a huge asset to the town and country, and I know that the future speaker will expand upon this more. But from the hall's point of view, from the town's point of view, from a long-term resident and businessman in the town, I would look for your support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Jones, could you, if this proposal didn't go forward, what position would be the trustees be in?
We've had to look at this because, again, it would be remiss of us not just to bank on this. We could try, we have to still keep to our aims and our culture. If we couldn't do those, we would have really little alternative. People have suggested maybe we sell it. If we did, the money would go to the Charities Commission to distribute as they saw fit. We could shut it up, or we could look for retail type establishments. But to try and meet the aims of the charity and the needs as we feel of the town, we don't feel there's many other alternatives. But there is nothing. We have researched as far as we can any other possible source to do something with the hall and maintain its objectives.
And have you done anything to help the people that are there now find alternative premises?
Right.
Or how are they coping?
There is obviously concern. Could I first of all say, and again, this was very important, we've been talking to Gina for some 18 months or more. We've made it very, very clear, and we have none of them will, I hope, disagree, that the people in there, the potters, the artists, the kitchen people, were made fully aware of our negotiations with Gina. They came on board after our thing started, and they were informed and agreed and signed that the agreements would end at 31st of December, and also to encourage them and to try and hope that they can build it. Because they came in at very substantially below market rates for rental. So they have, I know, been looking around, and I think there are other potentials, but to a degree, like the art gallery, Gina are still prepared to exhibit artists, local artists' works, and arrange shows for them if necessary. So the main thing is that none of them were taken under full pretenses. One resident who's been there a little bit longer, and again, we told them it was a startup business, and maybe looking for bigger premises, but we have informed them, kept them well in the picture, and updated them on every instance.
Thank you. Can I carry on? Sorry. It has been mooted around, and I've had several people ask me about what happens if the cinema doesn't take off as it should do. Would it likely to become an exclusive club, a subscription club?
There is no intention of that whatsoever, and I think that would be out of the conditions of the lease. It's a public cinema open to the public, and should, as I say, they have to try and change it or vacate, the amount of holding in escrow is considerable to reinstate the hall to its original use. Could I also say that we have, and consulted all the other trustees, had a public meeting where people will participate, and we have tried to put a plan B in place. It would be remiss if we hadn't done something, assuming this would go through. So we have looked at plan B, and most of these are things which, because of our restrictions of what we may do, we can't exactly say to some discount store, turn it into a pound store and be done with it. It would be the last thing we need to know, actually. So that's.
And have you looked at alternative uses? I'm sure you have.
Uses? Or...
Well, yeah, instead of a cinema, has anybody come
forward?
We
have had people in Bristol, and we have said, what do you suggest? There was one plan being put forward, and we asked for a business plan, none has come forward, and that was based on the arts and cultural side. We have invited, I have spoken to lots of people who rejected, and said to them, what do you suggest? We've had no other suggestions for you.
There's none influence.
Nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other members? Councillor Becky.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the escrow, Mr. Chair, if possible. Can I ask if that has been agreed by Keenan, what the size of that is, and how was that figure reached? I'm particularly concerned because I don't see any mention of an escrow being a condition of acceptance of planning.
An escrow has been agreed, an amount has been agreed. And through the solicitors who are now talking to each other, it is planned to put into an escrow account. The amount is very substantial, and as I rightly say, people sometimes will argue that it's not enough to restore the hall to its original condition. I will reiterate what I said before. The last thing we want to do is restore it to its original condition. A lot of the work they're doing there is fundamental to improving the structure of the hall. And finally, the work they do downstairs would not have to go back to the original, because again, it has been used in the past as a cafe. There are still 2 rooms and areas which could be used for other purposes. So the structure mainly is, and the expense mainly is in the expensive machinery and equipment and the seating upstairs. Again, they're not touching the internal walls being protected, so it will be fairly easy for it to do that.
Other members, any question? Councillor Gordon-Brown.
Chairman, I know there's a condition related to noise for local residents of the school. Historically, has the Victoria Hall had complaints from the immediate?
Once or twice in the last 5 or 10 years, to my knowledge, we've had a complaint, usually from weddings, which have been going on still till 2 in the morning. And often with weddings where there is, and other events, a lot of alcohol consumed, the noise level rises considerably. I would not anticipate that being a problem to the cinema. And it is a town centre, and equally it is surrounded by other pubs which provide entertainment, a small nightclub down the road, and other places where noise can be generated from. And again, as I say, the noise issue is the evening issue is well contained, I believe.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Peter, the decision of the trustees, was it a unanimous decision?
No, it was a majority decision.
And how many trustees do you have?
We have it's 9 or 9.
And are any of those members of the agricultural community?
No.
Is it not in the charter that they should?
No, it's not. What is in the charter that specifies what trustees should be is 3 from the council and 3 from the Open Town Council. For the last many years, to my knowledge, and having served in that capacity, the town and the county council have never been able to provide 3. They've always provided 1 each. We have provided in the last 2 or 3 years, many times, contrary to popular belief, we have tried to get new trustees on board continually. Obviously, the people on the agricultural side are much more concerned and involved in the agricultural showground area. And Victoria Hall, whilst it is 100 years ago was an agricultural hall, has lost that innate feeling. But nevertheless, it's still there in the deeds, and it's still something we need to adhere to. But no, we have nobody from. We would welcome any new trustees to be blunt.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just had to ask these on behalf of the agricultural community, being a farmer myself. The floor upstairs, the sprung floor, is very special. I believe it's one of 2 in the country. Will that be touched at all?
First, if you don't mind, could I correct you? It is not 1 or 2 in the country. There are many. I learned to dance.
Thank you.
Many years ago in South London on sprung floor. There are many. Yes, they will take extreme care to protect it and preserve it and preserve it. As the other point I think is the roof, which we it wasn't holding in. We re-exposed it and we've maintained it, and that again will be retained.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions from Mr. Jones? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
And I'll ask Mr. Bridge to come forward, please.
Well, interesting case there for a while.
When you're ready to do it.
Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with the grade 2 listing, or do you want to start with the actual deputation?
Whichever you prefer. You've got 3 minutes, and it's slightly plus, you realise.
That's 3 minutes on each.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's great. It's exactly on
Yeah. Can I start with the listing, please?
entirely as you, whichever order you like.
That's the next application, Chair.
This is the deputation.
Yes.
No, it's the next application of listed building.
Listed building is the next application.
So you want to do that second?
Yeah, sorry, I'm misunderstood. Yeah.
I understand. I'm speaking, I'm Paul Beach, by the way, if nobody knows. And I'm speaking as a member of the public. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. I've been involved in many functions in the town, including major outdoor markets, summer fairs, and organising many military ceremonies. For the record, I have never been against the cinema
in Oakham. In fact, I welcome it, I embrace it, but not at the expense of the Victoria Hall. The hall is used by U3A, who nationally have 450,000 members. They're not all visitors in Oakham, but they are there. Lindy Hop, ballroom dancing and yoga classes, all who will be forced to move on. We all know it was acquired by the Agricultural Society and registered as a charity. It was designated by a multitude of uses, or for a multitude of uses. Lectures, Christmas markets, keep fit and well-being classes, dance lessons, even Leicestershire and Rutland Freemasons at one time used it. Band concerts, charity events, even council meetings, when the projected attendance was greater than both councils were able to accommodate. It's the only place where you could put everybody in. John the plant seller stood outside for many years, plus art exhibitions for local artists and public carpet and clothes sellers. Forced out will be Connie Taylor, the potter who is so desperate to build a business here in the town centre. 5 businesses, all of whom are striving to earn a living from the hospitality afforded them by the charity. That will all come to an end unless, of course, the Charity Commission step in and object. Question: have all the trustees agreed to an extended single-use lease holder? And if so, has the lease already been signed legally? Are there any contingencies in place to help the tenants to move on? These people are paying rents and striving to earn a living. The people using the upstairs dance floor for keep fit, band concerts and wedding receptions, what happens to them? Name me one building in Rutland that can accommodate the same number of people and offer catering facilities for the attendees with food, drink and a dance floor. Has anybody done any due diligence to ascertain whether the projected £2.4 million needed is in place or not? If you buy a house, there are rules to doing that. You have to prove funds before it will proceed. No good having promises, you need formal offers from either a building society or a bank. This is a very high-risk strategy for a community project, and without the money in the bank, you should take a step back. We have spaces within the curtilage of Oakham for a modern, purpose-built cinema with plenty of parking and potentially far more up-to-date facilities. May I please suggest that this project is too big to make a decision here tonight. It affects more than the town and its residents. It affects the whole county. So would you please consider postponing a decision tonight and putting it to full council so that all of you get a chance to talk to those people who are directly affected by this project. Thank you.
Patrick, I recognise your support for what has just been said, and I would remind you this is a meeting open to the public, not a public meeting.
I didn't orchestrate it.
Clearly, my comment has fallen on deaf ears behind me. Yes.
If I may, just want to remind members that we are sitting here as a planning committee considering an application for planning permission, and therefore issues with regards to trustee arrangements and leases really are a separate matter. We are discussing the principle of development here.
Thank you very much indeed for that, and I'm sure members will be focusing precisely on those things. But now, members, you have the opportunity to ask Mr. Beach any questions you would like.
Can I just ask a point of information, Mr. Chairman? Shouldn't the applicant come after Mr. Beach, really? He should be able to answer those questions.
Well, he will have the opportunity in a moment to do what can be missed. The applicant. Yes, they come, Councillor, in the order in which they were submitted.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, and Mr. Robinson on behalf of the application.
Sorry,
yes,
I was thinking of Mr. Jones.
yeah. Are there any questions for Mr. Beach, please? It seems that you have satisfied them, Mr. Beach, so thank you very much.
Well, I
Ask Mr. Robinson if he
Richard, sorry.
Thank you. So, Mr. Robinson, thank you. When you're ready.
Good evening, members. Chairman, I'm Andrew Robinson. Thank you for the opportunity you've given me to talk this evening. I should explain that Rutland Keno is originally the idea of Genevieve Margaret, and I'm helping her realize it. Genevieve is a former Oakham schoolgirl, and I lived in Rutland for 33 years. Genevieve would have been here tonight, but she's actually attending COP26 on behalf of BAFTA, for whom she actually is currently working. Our view is that a boutique cinema in Oakham High Street would be a real benefit for Oakham and for other public residents of Oakham and beyond would agree with that. When we put our plan together for Rutland Keno, and can I remind everybody that this is being funded privately, there's no public money involved in this. We were aware of the success of several small specialized cinemas located in market towns like Oakham. Indeed, we actually went and talked to several of these cinemas in order to get a feel for what success we would be likely to have if we did the same thing in Oakham. And we found that many of these cinemas were indeed doing extremely well. And the other thing that they were doing was reviving the high streets of the towns in which they were situated. They were bringing people into the town in the evenings and the weekends, and I think this is something that would be extremely welcome in Oakham, and thereby generating custom for other local businesses, shops, restaurants, pubs. We aim to make Rutland Keno a real destination in Oakham, and we plan in our business plan to sell something like, in fact, beyond 1,000 tickets a week for this cinema. That's a lot of footfall coming into Oakham town. We will show a very wide range of films to suit the diverse tastes of Rutlanders. Because we're an independent cinema, we are not bound to any particular chains or whatever in terms of our programming. We can develop that entirely ourselves. We will show the best of mainstream cinema from the big studios, as well as independent films. And we will have some specific screen times geared to suit parents with babies, young children, teenagers, and other special groups. We also plan to screen operas, ballets, and the theatre, both UK and international productions. The cafe bar will serve the quality and where possible locally sourced products geared for the cinema-going audience. And the lounge space will be an additional community element for Rutland Keno, where we can hold meetings for other people, including the meetings that Peter mentioned in his speech. We are indeed talking to the Oakham Arts Society about the possibility of their using our lecture halls when they are not being used for screening movies. Rutland County Council's recent Future Rutland Conversation survey saw respondents put cinema in the top 5 things they wanted to see in the county, and in the top 5 things that are currently people are travelling out of the county to actually go to. So we believe that Rutland Keno will actually go quite a long way to meeting the objective of the council in terms of increasing arts and culture in Rutland. The planning officer presented the application extremely well, and we would just hope that tonight what I've said is adding some colour to that, and I hope you will feel minded to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Questions? One second. Councillor Cross.
My microphone's still on, I might as well use it, Mr. Chairman. This is a more than interesting debate and proposal. Have you looked at other venues for the keynote? Bearing in mind, parking in the high street is difficult at the best of times. I appreciate the requirement and need to rejuvenate the town, but the town has grown and people will use cars. We want people to come in, and so parking would be an issue. And easy parking makes for more spectators of the films.
Yes, so two parts to the question, I think, Councillor Ross. Have we looked at different venues? And the answer is we've actually spent 5 years looking at different venues. And Councillor Brown will be well aware of the work that we've been doing looking at different venues, because we've indeed had meetings where he's been present. It's not been possible to find a suitable venue for Radhankina with a town centre situation. We consider that to be absolutely vital to what we were trying to do in terms of making a viable cinema, but also something that was going to benefit the town. Building a multiplex next to McDonald's is not going to benefit the town that much, and we didn't think it would be viable either for ourselves. In terms of parking, I think this has been well addressed by the planning officer. We do not expect to create greater demands on parking than the existing use. In fact, most of our demand for parking, I think, will prove to be in the evenings and at the weekends, when I would argue that the pressure on parking is actually less in it than it is during the daytime. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gordon Brown.
Chair, just for clarity, in case things are conflict of interest. Mr. Robinson had discussions with me as the portfolio planning, when in fact a particular site was in question related to the local plan, which of course is no longer in place. So it's in relation to that is the issue. So, and also some other buildings in the centre of town, but not this particular.
Right, thank you. A useful clarification. Councillor Robinson.
Yeah, one question with regards to an enhanced offer to the wider community outside of Oakham. Would you be willing to, as a condition, perhaps pay towards a bus service to bring people in from the surrounding area? I'm sure that would be put more bums on seats, as they say, if people were able to come on a bus rather than by car, because there are some who don't have access to cars anyway.
I don't think it's our responsibility to provide transport to the cinema. We will certainly advertise bus times in the cinema so that people can actually take advantage of that. But I certainly don't see us making any commitment to put money towards bus services.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. We will duly open the debate. Members, again, Councillor Dale, I mean, you're, as you know, entitled to join in, and as a board member, if you would like to start off.
Not really. I think we're between a rock and a hard place, as your daughter wrote the other day. I've been using the Victoria Hall over 50 years. I organised discos for Wing Cricket Club, for the Rugby Club. We have the rugby dinners here, we have weddings here. I've done talks at the Victoria Hall, even auctions we've had there, which was hard work carrying furniture upstairs, but we did it. And as I asked Peter Jones if there's anything else that had come forward, an alternatives thing, then I would have, you know, it might have been a different matter, but there's no alternative coming forward, and what happens to the Victoria Hall in the meantime. So I'll have to leave it to members to make up their mind.
Other members? Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Chairman. I know the Victoria Hall should do accounts for the election, and I'm always struck by the interior. It has seen better days, I would suggest, being polite. And I think I personally, from listening to what has been said this evening, I personally believe that this will be a great asset to the town of Oakham. Reading on social media, floods of people have been saying how much they support it. And I think that whilst people, I'm sure people will be concerned with regards to the loss of immunity, that it's surrounded by other properties that can be used for, across the road you've got Congregation Church Hall. So there are a lot of places where people can go to alternatives to Victoria Hall. And listening to what has been said by Mr. Jones, there are real concerns. I mean, what we don't want to see is the Victoria Hall boarded up. The centre of Oakham has already got a large number of shops which are not actually serving the wider community. We've got something like 11 or 12 charity shops. We need to get something back into the centre of the town in order to be able to revitalise it. And I think if a company, an organisation is prepared to invest £2.5 million, which I think is the amount that's been proposed, on a building which could actually be a real beacon for regeneration of Oakham, then we should grasp it with both hands and run with it, in my opinion. So I'll hear what everybody else has to say, but in my opinion, from what I've heard this evening, it will be a great benefit to the town, and it's only the upstairs is going to be used for the cinema. Downstairs there will still be a lounge and coffee bar that people can use, and so as it stands at the moment, I'm supporting it, but I'll wait to hear what everybody else has to say.
Thank you very much, Councillor Oxley. Councillor Cross.
Mr. Chairman, like Councillor Down next door, I've organised dances in there. We've had the Fat Stop dinner in there. We've had AGMs, Agricultural Society, the Hunt, no end of things. And I do sympathise with the trustees who have the responsibility to try to carry on as best they can. I obviously rather emotional when I consider the times I've pretended to be Fred Astaire on the dance floor and failed dismally. But then one looks at a keynote, and then I look back at the old cinema in Oakham, where the dear usher used to give me her ticket. So I had some very good evenings there. But no, this is a serious debate. I hear what Peter Jones said. I hear what Paul Beach has said. I am worried that the finances, from what I understand, having listened tonight, are not tied up completely. And possibly I could receive some guidance from the planning officer as to the exact details of the monies that would be required to put the hall back to the same condition that it was in before it was changed.
I don't have precise details of the costs. What I would say is that the costs of the work to restore it are not really material to the planning consideration that we're making today. The issue is that the conservation officer has said that all of the works that are proposed to be done, or the majority of the works to be done, can be put back if needed. if that is needed, that is ultimately down to the trust and any contract that they have with Keno in terms of how they secure that. But it's not for members to seek to secure that tonight through the planning process. That really is for the trust and them in doing their due diligence to make sure that they've got the relevant finances in place to make sure that they can do the works necessary if they do need to put it back at any point.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you. I have to agree with Mark and William and Jack. It's a difficult decision. We've all used the Victoria Hall for many years, but as someone who does organise a lot of things currently, that's in the past. There's lots of venues outside of Oakham offering prices which the Victoria Hall, when we've got the quotes, not being able to cope with. And we need to ensure the Victoria Hall survives. I think there is a need for regeneration within the town, and I've been involved in the past with a number of groups trying to help to do that. And this can become a beacon to drive a different type of population into Oakham, or in an evening, apart from the pub drinking crowds, which will in turn open up opportunities for other businesses. It is difficult. I'm minded to approve this, but I think we also need to think wider, not in this forum, but in other forums, about how we can use some of the other empty spaces for some of these alternatives that exist to try and widen the breadth of what Oakham Town Centre offers, but that's bigger than tonight. We're looking at a planning matter, so we can only consider material considerations. I've listened to the debate, as someone who lives in the town and uses the town, I think it can be a massive benefit to Oakham going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I think just going back to the legal advice we've had tonight, the important matter in front of us, the planning committee, is the planning matters. Now, looking at the planning issues on the application we're discussing, i.e. the full application, I suggest there's not really a great deal of issue with that. The big issue for me would be the historic building and the issues around the historic building. I presume we're going to discuss that later after we've decided on the full application, or shall we take the two applications at the end to make decisions on?
We make a decision on this application.
Okay, fine.
And then we'll
Thank you. Thanks for pointing.
Anyone? Councillor Oxley.
Just following on from that, I think we can actually debate the historic elements on the building, because I think it would be difficult for us to, if we actually approve, to actually refuse the application which is to follow. So I don't think it would be remiss of us to discuss the historic elements of it as well.
I see no reason why, if you wish to raise something on fabric and design, you shouldn't do so. Yeah. Councillor Gordon-Brown.
So my reason for not raising that was because Mr. Beach wishing to make comment on the building aspect. I didn't want to go into the building aspect of it until we had that discussion.
No, I am taking.
Chairman, obviously the impact on the historic building is still a material planning consideration. The listed building application is something separate. If it would help members, I could do the presentation on the listed building, listen to the speakers, and then take the vote on both applications at the end, if that would help members.
You prefer this? Yes, in that case, that's what we'll do. I will just add a comment before you put that presentation in. Like other members, I can be nostalgic about past events in the Victoria Hall, but I don't think I've reached ready for my teenage memoirs yet. However, being completely serious about it, yes, we all have fond memories, or not have fond memories of Victoria Hall and what it used to be. I think what I would look at, again, mindful of the good advice coming from my right, that we're looking at material planning considerations that English heritage, looking at public buildings, are now much more relaxed in their attitudes, so long as it is for public benefit and accessible in a public way. If it meets 21st century needs, then they are far more inclined to be supportive, whereas before perhaps it was, as Councillor Cross alluded to, it was really the agricultural society taking the straws out of their mouth and generally using the facility. That was the 19th century approach. So again, but I think it's very appropriate, members, what you have said, and I'll hand over to Mr. Johnson to deal with that. So we will go for the benefit of the delegates, particularly Mr. Beach. We will go to Mr. Johnson's presentation of the listed building, and I will then call in order Mr. Jones, Peter Jones, Mr. Beach, and Mr. Andrew Robertson in that order. And the same thing will apply. You will have your 3 minutes and then any questions. Mr. Johnson.
Chairman, I'll keep my presentation relatively short, but just to point out on the planning application side, I should have mentioned in the addendum there was a slight change to the conditions 3 and 4 of the planning application, just to allow the works related to the before any works related to the items listed below sort of large scale drawings. There was a slight amendment to that. That means that some other works that weren't related to the large scale details, which would be very minor, could go ahead. And also, again, with regards to the storing of the doors as well. I also, there was a missing condition for ecology about nesting boxes for swifts that needs to be added as well. So in terms of the addendum, similar amendments are proposed to conditions 2 and 3 of the listed building condition, and it's just a very slight tweak to the wording to allow some other works to take place rather than having to wait until some of the large scale details are submitted. So the listed building application, again, I won't go through all the slides because they are the same as we've already been through. I think that the key point here, Chairman, is that the conservation officer did advise that they have no objections in principle, and their only concern that they picked up on was the removal of several doors, and that they would have expected more analysis on that part. And what has been agreed and is part of the submission and the condition is that the doors to be removed from the hall, that they are stored, and the details of where those are to be stored are to be submitted to and agreed in writing, and so that they're available for inspection should we want to, and so that they can be reinstalled should they ever need to be reinstalled for whatever reason. The other conditions that have been requested from the conservation officer relate to large scale details to a scale of 1 to 20 in terms of the entrance glazing to the lobby, to make sure that that's fixed appropriately. Again, details of the handrails, details of the proposed film poster display boxes, large scale details of the high level LEDs to be fixed to the underside of the cornice, and large scale details of any signage to be proposed as well, and also annotated plans and drawings showing the full extent of the works as listed above to be submitted and agreed, and then the works should take place in accordance with those details. As I said previously, there is a heritage assessment that's been submitted with the application. It goes through each of the alterations in turn, assessing the impact on the building and whether they're reversible or not. The majority of all the alterations are reversible. And the main thing is that the main features of the building will be preserved as part of the listed building application. So again, Chairman, based on the advice of the Conservation Officer and the fact that there's no objection from Historic England, it's recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, Mr. Jones, if you would like to come forward again, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for this unexpected opportunity. Thank you, Chair, for this unexpected opportunity. I'll be very brief. Some 15 years ago, I was very much involved with the work we did in the castle, restoring the outside, making much wider use of it when it ceased to be a pool. I was very much involved with the cinema, which we put in the museum. And my concern in this town has always been strong and respect for listed buildings. And they must stay in the town, but they must be used. And they must develop with the times. We do not want them sitting there as objects from the past museum pieces. They're there to be used, and that's what I believe is going to be fundamental. I don't think I can add anything more, but thank you for the opportunity to express it.
If you'd like to say that, then maybe some questions.
Probably something.
In fact, I should not. Thank you.
Sure.
And so I would ask Mr. Footpath to come forward the second time. Thank you.
Round two. I'm not an expert on grade 2 listings, but I do come across a lot of buildings in my capacity working for a local estate agent. I have to say that in the past we've had issues locally with listed buildings in the town. Does anybody remember Elizabeth Bryant? No, probably not. She was the conservation officer. Yeah, she would be fastidious, for want of a better word, when it came down to listed buildings. I remember around the corner here in Church Street with the baker. When that was taken over and it was knocked about, the developer thought that he could conceal it, what he was doing, by putting tarpaulin up around it, and he knocked half the wall out. She was down there like a rat of a drain pipe to actually say to him, put it back, and it cost him £60,000 to put it back. It also meant that he was 6 months behind. The reason I'm raising this is because our conservation officers have got to sit on these things, on all of the listed buildings that are in our town. They mean a great deal to us. They're not just buildings, they breathe, they live with us. And I think it's important that our conservation officers get involved from the start, as should all the regulations regarding to building practices. The building, I have lived there 26 years, and I love this town, I love this county, and it's got a lot going for it for individuals. As far as its heritage is concerned, we need to retain it. We can't just ignore it. And Peter was quite right. You know, we do have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to maintain these buildings. The only way we're going to do it is to be as diligent and as fastidious as Elizabeth Bryant ourselves. We've got to keep our eye on these things. What I'm saying is, let's not just take this as this decision is a difficult decision for anybody. You know, and it's all right publishing lists of people that are in favour of it. That's not empirical research. That's just people being able to work a keyboard and email something. Empirical research is all about going out there and talking to people. And that's why I based my presentation, my deputation, on the people that were involved. That is exactly the same. The building needs to be looked after. Let's make sure that we do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beach. Questions, Mr. Beach? Councillor Gordon-Brown.
Because, ask Mr. Beach, I presume you'll have read the heritage assessment Yep. And the statements are made in there. Would you have issues with that? I mean, it's very clear, I don't know if members of the public have read it, but it's very clear that all the way through, there are very detailed descriptions of the work that were carried out, very detailed descriptions of the reasons for those alterations, the impact and the significance of those alterations, and then the reversibility of those alterations. Yes. And having read it, I'm sure you'll agree that those alterations, particularly things like the sprung floor, they are making very significant efforts to ensure that that is retained in its form, not just there, but all the way through. And in reading it, I think the issue is one of reversibility. Reversibility seems to be the key word all the way through. So I just question whether you believe that that actually meets your requirement, that they have considered in a lot of detail and are very sympathetic to the existing fault.
I think what you're saying is quite, yes, I've read it and I understand it. What concerns me, and I'll say this again, what concerns me is the monitoring of these alterations. Are they reversible? How are they going to be held to those, to reversing them? There's got to be something in place that says, right, if you're pulling out of here, this is what you've got to do. Da-di-da-di-da-di-da. And they have to be made to do it. You can't just walk away from it. And we've seen so many times people walking away from buildings and leaving them in a real state. Round the corner, exactly the same. That could have been left. And that building would then have been Strickland's, would have then been just left with the great big hole in the side of it.
Thank you.
Does that cover what you asked?
Any other members? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Mr. Robinson.
As has been noted by both the planning officer and by Councillor around us talking now, we are very conscious of the heritage aspects of this building, and the whole approach we've adopted has been to preserve the aspects of the building and to make the minimum amount of changes that we need to the building from a historical point of view. We see huge benefits in marrying a cinema with this lovely building. I think the two work really well together. It'll certainly be a benefit to us as a cinema to welcome people into such a lovely space. I should add that our architect, who's actually here tonight, so if anybody has any particular detailed questions, I'd like to welcome her to answer them. Our architect is a specialist in putting cinemas into historic buildings and has done many, and some of these have been award-winning projects. So we have approached this from the very beginning to make sure that we take advantage of the building, but we also respect the building.
Any questions? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Members, I'm going to move from the chair an extension of a quarter of an hour from 9:30. If necessary, for the benefit of members of the public, we can take another quarter of an hour, but whatever happens, we have to finish at 10. I'm hopeful that we will achieve that this evening. So if I could just have approval from members that we go for an extra quarter of an hour at the moment. Thank you very much indeed. That means I'm at the moment aiming for 9:45, and if we need to, we've got a quarter of an hour. So over to you, members. Comments. As you quite rightly requested, we take the two things together, but we will then, on just looking for government support on it, we take them both.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Yes. So, Councillor Beckley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to comment Mr. Beach's point about the restoration. A question for Justin about how we are going to monitor those works to ensure that they are reversible. They have been done to the standard that is required, and that we are happy that it can be put back to its original or a better than original state.
Mr. Young. Mr. Chairman, we can get the conservation officer to inspect at relevant points. There's also, again, the large-scale detailed plans that are requested to be submitted is to make sure that we have clear details of how things are going to be fixed to the building. At the large scale that we've got at the moment, it doesn't show us everything that we need, and that's why we've requested that. But yes, we can monitor things through the conservation officer. I suggest rather than the enforcement officer. I'm also conscious of the amount of resources that we have in terms of conservation officer, and I am in the process of looking to recruit a full-time conservation officer for 5 days a week. So that will hopefully give members some reassurance that we will have some extra resource there as well.
Just 2 points. Thank you. We've been asking the conservation officer for 4 years, so that's music to my ears. I would just like to make sure, and if we can condition it in some way, that the observation is done at set milestones during the renovations, as opposed to after the event, where it's very difficult to retrospectively fix something which is not done correctly. So a statement of work with milestones with inspections at each point, I think, would be appropriate in this case for such an asset.
I see that the officer is making copious notes to that debate. Yeah, thank you. Other members? Councillor Cross.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. However, we've got 2 issues, and thank goodness we have our legal officer present to set our minds at rest as to where our deliberations and our decisions should lie. Obviously, it is an exceedingly emotional decision for a few of us in this room. I detect there is unease, within the town. However, there is also much support within the town for it, and I'm sure that it would be a great asset to the town centre. I don't think that we can go against the officer's recommendation, especially with the assurance that we've just been given that we are looking for a new conservation officer and that there will be regular visits to the site during any such works. There's still no mention of this escrow amount, which as a planning committee we have insisted upon in other applications. I would just like a little bit of clarity as to whether we can insist that that is part of this permission.
My understanding, I asked a similar question at briefing, is that no, it would not be possible to do that. I mean, first of all, the difficulty of putting a sum on it, and secondly, the legal possibility of enforcing that would be difficult in the extreme. I'm right.
Can I just say, I think the one where we looked at an escrow agreement was a minimums application, and the national guidance on minimums applications allows you to do it in very limited and specific cases with minimums applications, which don't apply in this instance. So I don't think it is appropriate in the consideration of this application.
Sorry, yes, come in.
Can I just add to that? Your conservation officer has obviously expressed concern with regards to retention of the doors, And the condition proposed is to ensure that in the event that the cinema were and the use came forward, those doors could be refitted. But in terms of concerns about restoration, conservation officer hasn't expressed concerns in terms of needing those funds. At the end of the day, if cinema didn't work, it would be down to the landowners to decide what to do with it. It would still have a use as a cinema. It doesn't mean to say that somebody else can come forward and actually use it as such.
I daren't argue with the legal officer.
Well, that's another first. We're going to get a conservation officer stopped out.
Let's put it this way, this is the first time I've met her. I'll leave, maybe I'll just keep my options open for next time.
Members, Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is a very difficult decision, very difficult decision. It is a building which has been at the heart of the community in Oakham for over a century. And we are not taking this decision lightly, or I'm certainly not taking it lightly. I'm listening to the debate, I'm reading the officer's report, I'm listening to the deputations. And I mean, I was struck by, in the papers, the proposal, item 6 or paragraph 6, the applicants have indicated that the proposal is to provide a new space for the community to enjoy films, lectures, working with the University of Third Age and the Art Society, or simply time with friends. Throughout the day, the space can cater to different audiences, from parents and babies in the morning, pensioners at lunch, and working families in the evenings. At weekends, kids clubs and films for teenagers can also make up the programme. And the versatile lounge space can be reconfigured for different groups, such as film or book clubs, knitting groups, or simply private hire. And I would suggest that's already happening there. But in a slightly, they're proposing doing it in a slightly different way, and the money that's going to be invested into it will, I am sure, from what I've heard, make it a massive asset to the town, and that's why I'm now minded to approve it. I wasn't sure when we first started because of the building itself. It's, you know, it is
Unique.
it's the Victoria Halls. It's the Victoria Halls, and so would it be appropriate for me to?
Well, I was going to say, unless any other member wants to come in, if you're prepared to make a proposal on that on the first main application, and in that case, I would take that as a proposal.
As per the officer's recommendation.
As per the officer's recommendation. Do I have a seconder? I'm happy to second the chair. I'll take Councillor Paul Brown in that case, yes. So all those in favour, please.
It is unanimous.
I think unanimous. Thank you very much, members. And now we move to the listing building application. Are you prepared to make a proposal again, Councillor?
I am, yes.
Thank you.
So,
Chair,
the condition about the monitoring by conservation officer.
Councillor Beggy, if I can perhaps agree the precise wording with you and the applicant after tonight's meeting, but to ensure that there's a monitoring programme
With milestones.
With milestones.
Yeah.
yes. And you quite rightly said at reasonable intervals, not at the conclusion of the work.
Correct.
Yes. So if we leave that, members, to be decided between the vice chairman and the officer outside the meeting, but we agree the principle of it. So again, I've got a proposal from Councillor Oxley. Is Councillor Gordon Brown or Councillor Paul Brown? Councillor Gordon Brown this time. And all those in favour, please.
Yes, unanimous.
And that again is unanimous. So thank you very much indeed for that, members. Now, as far as we've got those, yes, so, now just for benefit of members of the public, if you could please, I'm about to close the meeting, please leave the room. We've got a closed report from the officer. So thank you very much.